Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Eliza Crawford. This happened in October of 2024. I should have known better than to go hiking alone during the blood moon. I've always found solace in the wilderness. After my divorce from Andrew was finalized that summer, the walls of my Atlanta apartment seemed to close in a little more each day. Every corner held memories I couldn't face. The kitchen where we'd dance while cooking Sunday breakfast, the living room where we'd binge-watch shows curled under the same blanket. Even Max, my German Shepherd, seemed to be waiting for Andrew to walk through the door, his ears perking up at every sound in the hallway. So when October came, I packed my gear, loaded Max into my Subaru, and headed north to Blood Mountain. The name should have been my first warning, but I dismissed it as just another colorful Appalachian moniker, like Bald Mountain or Grassy Gap. As a wildlife photographer, I'd hiked most of Georgia's wilderness areas, but Blood Mountain had somehow eluded me. The tourism website proclaimed it as the highest peak on the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail, with breathtaking autumn vistas. What they failed to mention were the legends attached to the place, legends I would soon learn carried more truth than fiction. The drive from Atlanta took about 2 hours, the cityscape gradually giving way to rolling foothills and eventually the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains. I stopped at the Mountain Crossings outfitter at Neal's Gap to pick up a detailed trail map and chat with the staff. The bearded clerk eyed Max, who sat obediently at my feet, then looked back at me with what I now recognize as concern. "Solo hiking?" he asked as he rang up my map and the extra batteries I'd grabbed. "Just me and my best guy," I replied, patting Max's head. The dog's tail thumped against the wooden floor. The clerk hesitated. "You camping up at the shelter?" "Planning to set up around Lake Winfield Scott for the first night, then hike up to the summit tomorrow." "Why? Something I should know?" He shrugged, but there was tension in the gesture. "Just stay on the marked trails. We've had a few folks get turned around lately. Cell service is spotty, and there's a blood moon coming this weekend." I smiled. "I've got a GPS, extra batteries, and I've hiked plenty of remote areas before." "Right." He handed me my change. "Well, good luck out there, ma'am. Keep that dog close." I should have pressed him for details. Instead, I thanked him and headed back to my car, eager to hit the trail before noon. The parking area for the Lake Winfield Scott Recreation Area was nearly empty, which wasn't surprising for a Thursday in mid-October. The campground itself was officially closed for the season, but the trails remained open. I pulled into a spot near the trailhead, double-checked my pack, clipped Max's leash to his harness, and locked the car. The air was crisp, carrying the unmistakable scent of autumn, decaying leaves, damp earth, and pine. The forest canopy blazed with reds, oranges, and golds. I breathed deeply, already feeling the weight of the past months lifting from my shoulders. This was what I needed. Space, silence, simplicity. The trail started gently enough, winding through dense forest alongside a bubbling creek. Max trotted ahead, his nose working overtime, occasionally looking back as if to make sure I was keeping up. I stopped frequently to photograph interesting fungi, unusual rock formations, or particularly striking foliage. By late afternoon, we'd made good progress and found a small clearing about a quarter-mile from the lake, perfect for setting up camp. As I was pitching my tent, I heard voices approaching along the trail. A moment later, a family emerged from the woods. A tall, athletic man in his early 40s, a woman with a sensible bob haircut, and 2 children, a girl about 12 and a younger boy. The man noticed me and raised a hand in greeting. "Hello there. Mind if we set up nearby? The kids are pretty worn out." "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the ample space in the clearing. "Plenty of room." While they unloaded their packs, the man introduced himself as James Winslow, his wife as Sarah, daughter as Emma, and son as Liam. They were from Marietta, taking advantage of the kids' fall break for a camping trip. They spend too much time on screens, Sarah explained, helping Emma untangle tent poles. We figured a few days without Wi-Fi would do them good. Liam approached cautiously, eyeing Max. "Can I pet your dog, lady?" "His name is Max, and yes, you can." "He's very friendly," I said, keeping a close eye as the boy reached out. Max, ever the gentleman, sat patiently as Liam stroked his fur with tentative fingers. "We saw another hiker back about a mile," James mentioned as he hammered tent stakes into the ground. "Guy looked like he was carrying enough gear for a month in the woods." As if summoned by the description, a man in his late 30s appeared on the trail. He was tall and lean, with a short beard and observant eyes that immediately swept the clearing, taking in every detail before he approached. "Afternoon," he called. "Getting pretty late to find a spot. Mind if I join the neighborhood?" There was something I couldn't quite place about him, a tension in his movements that contradicted his easy smile. But after brief introductions, his name was Thomas Harper, he set up his tent efficiently at the edge of the clearing and kept to himself, occasionally writing in a small notebook. As dusk approached, we each prepared our dinners. The Winslows had a small cook stove where they heated canned stew. Thomas ate some kind of freeze-dried meal. I fed Max his kibble before heating water for my own dehydrated pasta. The normality of the scene was comforting. Strangers sharing space and the rituals of outdoor living. "So, what brings you out here alone?" Thomas asked me as we all sat around the Winslows' lantern after dinner. The night had grown cold quickly, our breath visible in the glow of the light. "I'm a photographer," I said, keeping it simple. "Wildlife, landscapes, and I needed some time away from the city." "Divorced?" he asked, his directness surprising me. Before I could answer, Sarah interjected. "That's a bit personal, isn't it?" Thomas shrugged. "Sorry, I noticed she's wearing a hiking ring on her right hand. Probably moved it over from the left. Common after a split." I instinctively touched the simple gold band. He was right, of course, though his observation skills made me uncomfortable. "What about you?" I deflected. "Why Blood Mountain?" Something flickered across his face. Hesitation, perhaps, before he replied. "Research. I'm writing an article on Appalachian folklore. This area has some interesting stories." "Like what?" Emma asked, leaning forward eagerly. Sarah shot her husband a warning look, but James just smiled. "It's okay. She's read scarier things in those books she keeps checking out from the library." Thomas seemed to consider his words carefully. "Well, Blood Mountain got its name from a battle between the Cherokee and Creek tribes long ago. So much blood was spilled that it stained the ground red. That's the sanitized version," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. "There are older stories. The Cherokee called this place Kauahi, the place of the deer, but local settlers had other names for it. They claimed the mountain demanded blood sacrifices, especially during certain moons." "That's horrible," Sarah said, pulling Liam closer to her side. "Just stories," Thomas assured her, but I caught something in his tone, the careful neutrality of someone not saying everything they know. "Well, on that cheerful note," James announced, standing up, "I think it's time we got the kids to bed. Long hike tomorrow." As the Winslows retreated to their tent, I found myself alone with Thomas. Max had settled at my feet, but I noticed he kept his eyes on Thomas, more alert than usual. "You scared them," I said. "Sometimes fear is appropriate," he replied, his gaze moving to the darkness beyond our small circle of light. "These mountains keep secrets. You shouldn't be up here alone." "I'm not alone. I have Max," I said, my hackles rising at his presumption. "And I've been hiking and camping solo for years." "Not here. Not now." He looked up at the sky where clouds obscured the stars. "Blood moon's coming. 3 days away. You don't seriously believe? Belief has nothing to do with it. He cut me off, his voice hard. 3 hikers have gone missing in this area in the past year, all around the time of seasonal full moons. 2 were never found. The third, he hesitated. Let's just say what they did find didn't look human anymore. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. Why are you really here? I asked. Thomas stared into the darkness for a long moment before answering. My sister disappeared on this mountain last November. The police called off the search after 2 weeks, said she probably fell into a ravine, died of exposure, but Melissa was an experienced hiker. She wouldn't have made rookie mistakes. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He nodded, then stood. Just keep your eyes open, and that dog close. He glanced at Max, who was now standing, his attention fixed on something in the dark woods. Animals sense things we can't. With that cryptic warning, Thomas retreated to his tent, leaving me alone with Max, who continued to stare intently into the forest, a low growl building in his throat. What is it, boy? I whispered, straining to see what had caught his attention. The darkness between the trees seemed absolute, impenetrable. But then, just for a moment, I thought I saw movement, a deeper shadow shifting against the blackness. Max's growl intensified. Come on, I said, suddenly eager for the illusory safety of nylon walls. I guided him into our tent and zipped the door shut, irrationally relieved to have even that flimsy barrier between us and whatever lurked outside. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed of running through endless woods, pursuing or being pursued. I couldn't tell which. The trees whispered names that weren't mine, and somewhere ahead, a light pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. I woke several times to Max's alert posture, his ears pricked toward sounds I couldn't hear. When morning finally came, I emerged from my tent to find Thomas already up, boiling water on a small stove. He nodded in greeting but said nothing, the shadows under his eyes suggesting his night had been no more restful than mine. The Winslows were still in their tent, though I could hear movement inside. I checked my phone, no signal as expected, then pulled out my GPS to mark our location and plan the day's route. I frowned at the screen. That's not right, I muttered, tapping the device. Thomas looked up. Problem. GPS says we're about 2 miles northeast of where we should be. That's impossible. I'd hiked in from the southwest yesterday, following the clearly marked trail. The unit had been working perfectly. Let me see, Thomas said, coming over. He studied the screen, then pulled out his own GPS. His device showed the same erroneous location. That's interesting. Interesting isn't the word I'd use. Concerning, maybe. These should be accurate to within a few meters. Before we could discuss it further, the Winslows emerged from their tent. Liam immediately ran to Max, who suffered the child's enthusiastic petting with dignified patience. Morning, James called cheerfully. Everyone sleep okay? Fine, I lied, not wanting to mention my disturbing dreams or the GPS anomaly. Anyone want coffee? I've got extra. As we shared a simple breakfast, I noticed Emma seemed subdued, picking at her instant oatmeal without enthusiasm. Everything okay, sweetie? I asked. She glanced at her parents before answering. I heard someone walking around our tent last night. They were whispering. Sarah frowned. Honey, you were dreaming. No one was outside. I wasn't dreaming, Emma insisted. They kept saying, come out, come out. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. I saw Thomas watching the girl intently. Probably just the wind, James said finally, too brightly. Makes all kinds of weird sounds in the trees. It wasn't the wind, Emma muttered, but let the subject drop. We broke camp after breakfast. The Winslows planned to head to the summit and back in one day, then drive home. Thomas mentioned continuing north along the Appalachian Trail. I had originally intended to climb to the summit as well, but the GPS malfunction made me hesitate. I think I'll explore around the lake today, I told them. Something's wrong with my GPS. I want to make sure I can navigate properly before going farther. Smart, Thomas said, and I caught the approval in his voice. The summit trail is well marked, though. Hard to get lost if you stay on it. In the end, we all decided to hike together to the lake, then separate according to our plans. The morning was clear and cool, perfect hiking weather. Max trotted ahead, occasionally disappearing around bends in the trail only to reappear moments later, checking on me. The Winslow children seemed to have forgotten the night's unease, running ahead with the boundless energy of youth. We'd been hiking about 40 minutes when the trail opened up to reveal Lake Winfield Scott, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding autumn foliage and blue sky. It was breathtaking, and I immediately pulled out my camera. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, coming to stand beside me as I framed a shot. "Worth the hike just for this," I agreed. We continued around the eastern shore of the lake where the trail split. One fork led up toward Blood Mountain's summit, the other continued around the lake. This was where we would part ways. "Sure you don't want to join us for the summit?" James asked. "The views are supposed to be spectacular." I hesitated, tempted, but Max was acting strangely again, staring into the woods with his hackles raised. "No, I think I'll stick with my plan. Maybe tomorrow after I figure out what's wrong with my GPS." We exchanged good wishes and phone numbers, promising to text when we all had service again. As the Winslows and Thomas started up the summit trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might not see some of them again. Max and I spent the morning circumnavigating the lake, stopping frequently for photographs. The tranquility of the place worked its magic, and I began to dismiss my earlier apprehensions as nothing more than lingering stress from the divorce combined with Thomas's ominous stories. Around noon, we took a break on a rocky outcrop overlooking the water. I shared a protein bar with Max, then checked my GPS again. It now showed us in a completely different location, nearly 5 miles from our actual position. I frowned, replacing the batteries, but the error persisted. Clouds had begun moving in from the west, dark and threatening. The forecast had mentioned a chance of afternoon showers, but these clouds looked more serious, the harbingers of a genuine storm. I decided to head back to our original campsite to set up before the rain hit. We were about halfway back when the first rumble of thunder echoed across the lake. Max whined, pressing against my leg. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in moments, and the forest grew unnaturally dark as the storm clouds swallowed the sun. "It's okay, boy," I reassured him, picking up the pace. "We'll be fine." The rain started as a light patter against the leaves overhead, but quickly intensified until it was pouring through the canopy in sheets. Within minutes, I was soaked despite my rain jacket. The trail, now slick with mud, became treacherous. Max stayed close, as miserable as I was. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Too close. We needed shelter, and soon. I remembered passing a small cabin earlier, set back from the lake 100 yards or so. It had looked abandoned, but at this point, any roof would do. Turning off the main trail, I tried to retrace our steps toward where I thought the cabin had been. The rain made it difficult to see far ahead, and the increasingly muddy path was hard to follow. After what seemed like an eternity of slogging through the downpour, I was about to give up when Max suddenly perked up and darted forward. "Max, wait!" I called, hurrying after him. He stopped at the edge of a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin I'd glimpsed earlier. Up close, it looked simultaneously more dilapidated and more recently used than I'd thought. The log structure was weathered, with moss growing on the north-facing wall, but smoke rose from the stone chimney. I hesitated. Trespassing on someone's property wasn't part of my plan, but the storm was only intensifying. Another lightning strike, close enough to make the hair on my arms stand up, made the decision for me. I approached the cabin and knocked on the rough wooden door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Hello? Is anyone home? I'm caught in the storm and need shelter." After another moment of silence, I tested the door. It swung open with a creak that seemed straight out of a horror movie. Max growled softly, his body tense. "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. "Hello," I called again as we stepped inside. The cabin's interior was dim, but surprisingly cozy. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the single room. Simple furniture, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a rocking chair near the fire, filled the space without crowding it. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with an aromatic mixture of rosemary, thyme, and something else I couldn't identify. "Well, don't just stand there dripping on my floor, dear. Come in properly and shut the door." I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman had appeared silently from what I now realized was a small pantry alcove. She was perhaps in her 60s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a bun and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to look straight through me. Despite her age, she moved with fluid grace as she approached. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. The storm—" "No need to explain," she cut me off, gesturing toward the fire. "Nature has her moods. Go on, warm yourself. Your dog too, though he doesn't seem to like my home much." Indeed, Max remained near the door, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the woman. "Max, it's okay," I said, patting my leg. Reluctantly, he came to my side but kept his attention on our hostess. "Smart animal," she remarked. "They sense things, don't they? I'm Eleanor Blackwood, by the way. And you would be?" "Eliza Crawford. Thank you for letting us in." "Not at all. I don't get many visitors, especially this time of year." She moved to the fire, adding a log with practiced ease. "You're soaked through. Let me find you something dry to wear while your clothes dry by the fire." Before I could protest, she disappeared into the pantry again and returned with a simple linen dress. "This should fit. Change behind that screen." She pointed to a folding wooden screen in the corner that I hadn't noticed before. "I'll make us some tea." The dress did fit, almost perfectly, which I found odd given our different builds. Eleanor was willowy and tall, while I'm more average in height and athletic. But the warm, dry fabric was welcome against my skin, so I didn't question it. When I emerged, my wet clothes hung on a rack near the fire, and Eleanor was pouring amber liquid from a cast-iron kettle into 2 earthenware mugs. "Herb tea," she explained, handing me a mug. "My own blend, good for warming the blood and settling the nerves." The tea smelled strongly of mint and something else, sweet but with a bitter undertone. I took a cautious sip. It was actually quite pleasant, warming me from the inside out. "You're not from around here," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. "Atlanta," I replied. "Just hiking for a few days. I met a family on the trail, the Winslows, and another hiker named Thomas." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes at the mention of Thomas, but her expression remained pleasant. "Ah, yes, I believe I've seen that young man before. Keeps to himself, doesn't he? The family, they have children?" "Yes, 2, Emma and Liam." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Children love these woods. They see what adults have forgotten how to see." She took a sip of her tea, watching me over the rim of her mug. "And what brings you to Blood Mountain, Eliza Crawford? Most hikers come in the summer months." I explained about my photography, leaving out the part about the divorce. Something made me reluctant to share too much personal information with this strange, intense woman. "A seeker of beauty," she said approvingly. "The mountain has much to show those with eyes to see, but you should be careful. There are places up there where the veil grows thin, especially now, with the blood moon approaching." My conversation with Thomas came flooding back. "You believe those stories too?" Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Belief has nothing to do with truth, my dear. These mountains were old when the first humans walked between their trees. They have their own rules, their own appetites." A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth. Max whined softly, pressing against my leg. "I should go," I said, suddenly uncomfortable. "The rain seems to be letting up." Indeed, the drumming on the roof had lessened to a gentle patter. but Eleanor made no move to return my clothes, which were still damp. "Nonsense. The storm will pick up again soon. Besides, it's nearly dusk. These woods are no place to be wandering after dark." Her tone was gentle but firm. "You'll stay here tonight. I insist. Your friends might even find their way here if the storm drove them back from the summit." As if to punctuate her words, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the rain intensified again. I found myself reluctantly agreeing to stay, though Max's continuing unease nagged at me. Eleanor proved to be a surprisingly gracious hostess. She prepared a simple but delicious stew for dinner, served with crusty bread that she claimed to have baked that morning. Throughout the meal, she asked questions about my life, my work, my family, showing particular interest in whether I had children or planned to. "Not yet," I admitted, feeling a pang at the thought of the family I'd once hoped to build with Andrew. As night fell completely outside, making the cabin's windows into black mirrors, Eleanor told stories of the mountain, legends that sounded similar to what Thomas had mentioned, but with subtle differences. In her telling, the mountain wasn't simply a place of bloodshed, but a sentient entity that required payment for safe passage. "The old families knew this," she said, her face shadowed in the firelight. "They left offerings at certain places, crossroads, creek forks, stone circles. Nothing valuable by human standards, just small tokens of respect. But the new people, the tourists and through hikers, they take and take without giving back. And so the mountain takes from them instead." "Takes what?" I asked, my mouth dry despite the tea I'd been drinking steadily. Eleanor smiled, and in the flickering light her teeth seemed sharper than they should be. "Whatever it needs, Eliza. Whatever it hungers for." I was saved from having to respond by a pounding at the door. Max immediately leapt to his feet, barking furiously. Eleanor seemed unsurprised by the interruption. "More lost souls," she murmured, rising gracefully to answer the door. The Winslow family stood huddled on the porch, drenched and miserable-looking. James supported Sarah, who appeared to be limping. "Thank God," James exclaimed when he saw me. "We thought we were lost for sure." Eleanor ushered them inside with the same insistent hospitality she'd shown me. "Children, you're soaked to the bone. Come, by the fire. I have dry clothes and hot food." As the Winslows dried off and changed into clothes that Eleanor somehow had ready, clothes that, like mine, fit each of them surprisingly well, they explained what had happened. They'd reached the summit with Thomas, but on the way down, the storm hit hard. Sarah had slipped on wet rocks and twisted her ankle. Then they'd somehow gotten off the main trail. Without GPS, theirs had malfunctioned just like mine, and with darkness approaching, they'd been on the verge of panic when they spotted smoke from Eleanor's chimney. "Thomas wanted to keep going," James explained as he accepted a bowl of stew. "Said we were close to the lake, but with Sarah's ankle and the kids exhausted, I wasn't taking chances." "Where is he now?" I asked, suddenly concerned. James shrugged. "Kept going his own way. Stubborn guy." Eleanor served everyone food and more of her special tea, paying particular attention to the children. "Growing bodies need nourishment," she cooed, ruffling Liam's hair in a gesture that made the boy shrink back slightly. As we ate, I noticed Emma staring at Eleanor with undisguised fascination. "Are you a witch?" the girl asked abruptly. "Emma!" Sarah gasped. "That's incredibly rude." But Eleanor just laughed, a melodious sound that somehow raised the hairs on the back of my neck. What a delightful question. Some might call me that, I suppose. I prefer keeper of old ways. I know the plants that heal and the words that comfort. Is that witchcraft to you? Emma nodded solemnly. "You have a witch's cottage, and you knew we were coming." A strange tension filled the room. Eleanor's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "The mountain tells me things, child, just as it might speak to you if you listen properly." After dinner, Eleanor insisted we all stay the night, arranging sleeping places throughout the cabin. The Winslows took the bed, with Emma on a pallet beside them. Liam was given a small cot near the pantry. I was to sleep on a mat near the fire with Max beside me. "Rest now," Eleanor said as she dimmed the oil lamps. "The storm passes, but the night holds its own dangers." I lay awake long after everyone else seemed to be sleeping, including Eleanor, who had retreated to what she called her meditation space behind the pantry. Max remained alert beside me, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of the fire. Something felt wrong. The tea had left a strange aftertaste, and my thoughts seemed sluggish, dreamlike. I found myself replaying Eleanor's stories, her warnings about the mountain's hunger, the way she'd looked at the children. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, Max was standing over me, whining urgently. The fire had died completely, leaving the cabin in darkness save for a faint glow coming from behind the pantry. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized Liam's cot was empty. Alarmed, I got up as quietly as possible and checked the main door. Still bolted from the inside, the only windows were shuttered and latched. Where could the boy have gone? A soft sound from the pantry caught my attention. Moving cautiously with Max at my heels, I approached the narrow doorway. Beyond the pantry with its hanging bundles of herbs and shelves of jars was another door, slightly ajar, golden light spilling through the crack. I hesitated, torn between respecting Eleanor's privacy and concern for Liam. A child's voice decided me, Liam, speaking in a monotone unlike his normal excited chatter. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent ice through my veins. Pushing the door open wider, I found myself looking down a short set of stairs into a cellar I wouldn't have guessed existed. The space below was illuminated by dozens of candles, their light reflecting off what appeared to be a large copper basin in the center of the room. Eleanor stood with her back to me, hair now loose and flowing past her waist, wearing a deep red robe. Before her, Liam stood perfectly still, eyes vacant, wearing only his underwear. "The blood remembers," Eleanor was saying, her voice deeper than before, resonant with power. "The flesh knows. Tell me what you see, child." "Darkness," Liam replied in that same empty voice. "Roots reaching through stone. Hunger without end." "And what does it hunger for?" "Life. Warmth. The spark that burns in beating hearts." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Yes. And tonight we begin to feed it, as my mothers have done for 300 years. The blood moon comes, and with it, the thinning of the veil." She raised a hand in which gleamed a curved knife. Without thinking, I burst through the door. "Stop!" Eleanor turned, and in the candlelight her face was transformed. Younger somehow, more beautiful but terrible in its cold perfection. "The photographer," she said, sounding mildly annoyed. "I thought the tea would keep you asleep longer." "Get away from him," I demanded, moving down the stairs. Max followed, a continuous growl rumbling from his chest. "You misunderstand," Eleanor said calmly. "I'm not going to harm the boy. He's merely a vessel, a mouthpiece. The first offering is always blood freely given." She held up her other hand, which I now saw was already cut across the palm, blood dripping into the copper basin. "Liam, come here," I called, but the boy didn't respond, didn't even blink. "He can't hear you," Eleanor said. "He walks between worlds now, as children sometimes can. Did you never wonder why so many legends feature lost children, Eliza? They cross boundaries more easily than adults, their souls still remembering the darkness from which all life emerges." She turned back to Liam. "Now, child, take the knife. The first cut is yours to make." To my horror, Liam reached for the blade with mechanical precision. "Max, guard," I commanded, and my loyal shepherd sprang forward, planting himself between Liam and Eleanor, teeth bared. Eleanor's beautiful face contorted with anger. "Call off your beast, or I promise you'll watch him die screaming." "What have you done to the boy?" I demanded, edging closer, looking for an opening to grab Liam. nothing permanent. Yet. She made a subtle gesture with her bleeding hand, and to my shock, Max yelped and backed away as if struck. The next will not be a warning. A scream from upstairs interrupted whatever she planned next, Sarah's voice high with panic. "Liam! Emma! James!" Eleanor's concentration broke for just an instant, but it was enough. I lunged forward, grabbing Liam around the waist and dragging him backward toward the stairs. The boy struggled weakly, still in his trance-like state. "Foolish woman," Eleanor hissed, all pretense of the kindly hostess gone. My name is Marcus Harrington. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024, during what was supposed to be a relaxing hiking trip through the Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia. I remember the day we left as if it were yesterday, though sometimes I wish I could forget it entirely. My girlfriend Eliza Chen had been pushing for us to disconnect the kitchen where we danced while cooking Sunday breakfast. She was always the adventurous one, the living room dark hair usually pulled back curled under the same ponytail and eyes that lit up whenever she talked about her next outdoor excursion. Seemed to be waiting for Andrew to walk through the door. She had already hiked more trails than most people do in a lifetime. So when I was more hesitant, I preferring the comfort of our Atlanta apartment into my Subaru predictability and headed north to Blood Mountain. But I loved her enough to step outside my comfort zone. But I dismissed it as just another colorful Appalachian pictures of Blood Mountain like and the surrounding areas, or Grassy Gap. Just 3 days. As a wildlife photographer, I'd hiked most of Georgia's wilderness her brother's 7-year-old Australian Blood Mountain had somehow a bundle of energy with mismatched blue and brown eyes that we were watching the highest brother was on the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail. The dog had taken an immediate liking to autumn vistas, which Eliza said was a good sign. What they failed to mention were the legends attached to the place. Legends I would soon learn. We can hike up to the shelter on Blood Mountain. The drive from Atlanta took about 2 hours. Maybe check out some of the smaller trails around rolling foothills and eventually the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains. I stopped at the mountain crossings outfitter when she looked at me with that mixture of excitement and hope and chat with the staff. We packed light but thoroughly. The bearded clerk eyed sleeping bags, sat obediently at my feet for 3 days, then looked back at me with what I now recognize as for our phones. Though Eliza warned me, hiking service would be spotty as he rang up my map and the extra batteries She'd brought a physical map and compass just me and my best guy. Just in case, I replied, patting Max's head that suggested my dependency on GPS thumped against the wooden floor. The drive from Atlanta took about 2 hours. Camping up at the shelter, gradually giving way planning to set up around Lake Winfield Scott for the first mountains dressed in hike up to the summit tomorrow. We parked at the Byron Reese Memorial Trail parking lot. Our planned entry point to the Appalachian Trail, which would then lead us to Blood Mountain. Stay on the marked trails. Ready for an adventure? We've had a few folks get turned around securing her backpack and clipping Finn's leash to his harness. And there's a blood moon coming this weekend, trying to match her enthusiasm. I've got a GPS. Lead the way. Extra batteries. The first few hours I've hiked plenty of remote areas before. The weather was perfect. He handed me my change. Hiking didn't leave us drenched in sweat. Good luck out there, ma'am. But warm enough that we were comfortable in light jackets. I should have pressed him for details. The trail wound through forests of oak, I thanked him and headed back to my car. Trees, eager to hit the trail before tapestry of red. Orange, the parking area for the Lake Winfield Scott recreation area was nearly empty, occasionally stopping to investigate an interesting scent before looking back as if the campground itself was officially closed for the season. We reached the Blood Mountain shelter by early afternoon. I pulled into a spot near the trailhead, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, clipped Max's leash to his harness with 3 walls and a fireplace. The air was crisp. Several other hikers were already there, taking pictures of the view or resting on the surrounding rocks. Earth and pine. Beautiful, isn't it? The forest canopy blazed. An older man approached us, gesturing toward the panoramic view of mountains and valleys, stretching feeling the weight of the past months. His weathered face suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. Was what I needed. Name's Walter. Walter Keegan. Silence. Eliza Chen. My girlfriend replied with a friendly smile. Gently enough. This is Marcus, through dense forest alongside a bubbling Walter nodded at me before crouching down to pet Finn, his nose working his tail enthusiastically, looking back as if to make sure I was keeping up. You folks planning to stay up frequently to photograph interesting fungi, Eliza said. Unusual We're heading down to Lake Winfield, particularly striking foliage. Walter's expression shifted slightly. We'd made good progress and found almost clearing about a quarter mile from the lake. Be careful on the descent setting up camp, especially as it gets dark. As I was pitching my tent, I heard voices approaching along the trail. There was something in his tone. A moment later, a family emerged from the woods. It's not the dark itself you need to worry about in his early 40s. a woman with a sensible bob haircut. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small leather pouch and a younger boy. Here. The man noticed Old me Cherokee and raised a hand in greeting. I picked it up years ago from a woman in Dahlonega who claimed to be descended from the medicine people. Pretty worn out. He handed it to Eliza, who looked at it gesturing to the ample space it into her pocket. Plenty of room, thank you. While they unloaded their packs, the man introduced himself as James Winslow. Walter advised. His wife is Sarah, especially if you hear anything, and son as Liam. The mountain earned its name for a reason, taking advantage of the kids. Before I could ask what he meant, another hiker called Walter's name. They spend too much time on screen, excused himself with a nod. Explained, helping Emma untangle tentacles. I asked Eliza once he was out of earshot. We figured a few days without Wi-Fi would do them good. Probably just local folklore. Eyeing Max. Blood Mountain got its name from a battle between the Cherokee and Creek tribes. His name is Max, and there are all sorts of stories about this place. He's very friendly. I wanted to press further, keeping a close eye. She was already adjusting her backpack and signaling to Finn, the gentleman, we were moving sat patiently as Liam stroked his fur began our descent toward Lake Winfield Scott. We saw another hiker that Walter had been trying to warn us about mentioned as he hammered tent stakes. The trail down from Blood Mountain was steeper and more challenging. Looked like he was carrying enough gear for a month in the woods. Rocks and roots created natural obstacles by the required our full attention. A man in his late 30s appeared on the trail. Down, we passed a small clearing off to the side of the trail, and observant eyes that immediately swept the clearing. Eliza suggested dropping her pack and stretching her shoulders. Finn immediately flopped down in a patch of sunlight. Getting pretty late to find a spot. Mind if I join the neighborhood? Grateful for the rest. There was something I couldn't quite place about him. As I drank from my water bottle, attention in his movements, I noticed a strange arrangement of stones at the edge of the clearing. But after brief introductions, in a rough circle with a sixth Thomas Harper, he set up his tent efficiently at the edge of the clearing and pointed towards the formation, occasionally writing in a small notebook. Probably just as trail dusk approached, someone left prepared our dinners. But it didn't look random. Had a small cook stove where they heated there was something deliberate about the placement. Thomas ate some kind of freeze-dried meal. I fed Max's kibble before heating water for my spine dehydrated the warm afternoon sun. The normality of the scene was comforting. Keep moving. Strangers sharing space eager to leave the clearing behind. Living. We still have a ways to go out here the lake, right? Thomas asked me as we all sat around the Winslow's lantern about 3 more miles. The night had grown cold. We should make it well before sunset. Our breath visible in the glow of the light. We continued downward. I'm a photographer, but I found myself frequently glancing over my shoulder, wildlife, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. I needed some time away from the city. To sense my unease. Divorced, staying closer to my side than he had been surprising me. The trail grew darker as the forest became denser. That's a bit personal. The cheerful autumn colors that had surrounded us on the higher slopes gave way to more somber evergreens. I noticed she's wearing a hiking ring on her right hand. It seemed to stretch longer than they should from the afternoon light. Common. Do you hear that? Eliza instinctively touched the simple gold cocking her head to one side. He was right, of course. Though his observation skills beyond the usual forest sounds. What about you? Wind through branches, distant birds, Blood Mountain, the occasional rustle of small animals across his face. Hesitation, hear perhaps, before he replied. I thought I heard. Research, she trailed off. I'm writing an article on Appalachian folklore. Mind. Must have been the wind. Has some interesting stories. But Finn had heard it too. Like what? His ears were leaning forward eagerly, his body tense as he stared into the trees beside the trail. James just smiled. A low growl rumbled in his chest. She's read scarier things in those books she keeps checking out from the library. Eliza reached for his collar, but before she could grab it, he bolted into the forest. Well, Finn! Blood Mountain got its name from a battle between the Cherokee and Creek tribes long ago, struggling to keep up as they disappeared into the thick underground red. The forest floor was sanitized with hidden holes and fallen branches, his voice dropping slightly. I'd lost sight of both Eliza and stories. Eliza, Cherokee called this trying to control the rising panic in my voice of the deer. Where are you? But local settlers had other names. Her voice came from somewhere to my left. The mountain demanded blood sacrifices, but he won't come back during certain moons. I changed direction. That's horrible. Pushing through a dense thicket of mountain laurel closer to her side. When I finally broke through, I found myself in another small clearing. But I caught something in his tone. Was there, frantically calling Finn, neutrality of someone stood rigid at the far edge, his attention fixed on something I couldn't see. On that cheerful note, what's gotten into him? Standing up, I panted, joining Eliza. I think it's time we got the kids to bed. I don't know. He's never done this before. As the Winslows retreated voice as she approached Finn, I found myself alone. Hey, buddy, come here. What's wrong? Max had settled at my feet. As I moved to help her, he kept his eyes on Thomas, another stone more alert than usual, identical to the one we'd seen earlier. I said, 5 stones in a circle with one in the center is appropriate. But this one replied, his gaze moving to the darkness beyond on the center stone that looked disturbingly like mountains keep secrets. You shouldn't
Finn's
be up here
growl
alone.
deepened
as Eliza reached for
I'm
him.
not alone.
Suddenly,
I have Max,
he barked sharply.
I said,
a
my
sound of
hackles
alarm
rising
at his
aggression,
presumption,
and bolted
and
again.
I've been hiking and
this
camping
time
solo
back
for
toward
years.
the trail.
Not here.
Finn, not
Eliza
now.
shouted, but I grabbed her
He looked
arm.
up at the sky,
Wait,
where clouds
I said,
obscured
pointing
the
at the stone
stars.
formation.
Blood moon's
Look at
coming.
that. 3
Doesn't it
days
seem
away. Wrong to
You
you.
don't seriously believe.
She followed my gaze.
Belief has
her
nothing
expression
to do with
shifting
it.
from concern
He cut me
to
off.
unease.
His voice hard.
Let's get back to the trail. 3
Finn
hikers
probably
have
went
gone
that
missing
way
in this
anyway.
area in the past
We
year.
hurried back the
all
way
around
we'd
the
come,
time of seasonal
calling
full
for
moons.
Finn as we went.
2 were
The
never
forest
found.
seemed different now.
The third, the trees closer
He
together.
hesitated, the shadows deeper.
Let's just
the
say
air
what they did
heavier.
find didn't look human
By the time we
anymore.
reached the trail again,
A chill
my
ran
heart
down my
was racing
spine that
from
had
more
nothing
than
to do
just
with the
exertion.
October air. To
Why
our relief,
are you really
Finn
here?
was waiting
I
for
asked,
us, sitting anxiously
Thomas
at the edge
stared
of the
into
path.
the darkness for
When
a
he
long
saw
moment
us,
before
he whined
answering.
and pressed against Eliza's
My
leg.
sister disappeared on this
Don't
mountain
do
last
that
November.
again.
She
The
scolded
police
gently,
called off the
attaching
search
his
after
leash
2
this
weeks.
time.
Said
You
she
scared
probably
us.
fell into a ravine. I checked
Died
my
of
watch
exposure.
and was surprised to
But
see
Melissa
that it was
was an
later than I
experienced
expected.
hiker.
She wouldn't have
We
made
should
rookie
hurry if
mistakes.
we want to reach the lake before dark.
I'm sorry, I said,
Eliza
and
nodded.
meant it. And
He
we set
nodded,
off at a
then
brisker
stood.
pace. But the trail seemed to
Keep your
stretch
eyes
on
open.
longer than it should
And that
have.
dog close.
According to Eliza's
He glanced
map,
at Max,
we
who
should
was
have
now
reached Lake
standing,
Winfield Scott
his attention
well before
fixed on
sunset.
something in the dark woods.
But as the light began to fade,
Animals
we were
sense
still
things we
making our way
can't.
down the mountain. With that cryptic
This doesn't
warning,
make sense,
Thomas retreated
Eliza
to his
muttered,
tent, consulting
leaving her
me
map
alone
again.
with Max, who continued to
We
stare
should be there
intently
by
into
now.
the forest.
A
I
low
pulled out my
growl
phone to
building
check
in his
GPS, but as Walter
What
had
is it,
predicted,
boy?
there was
I
no
whispered,
service.
straining to see what had
The
caught his
sky above
attention.
the trees was
The
turning a
darkness
deep
between the
purple,
trees seemed
tinged with
absolute,
red near the horizon.
impenetrable.
But then,
We need to make
just
camp,
for a moment,
I
I
suggested,
thought I saw
trying to
movement,
keep the
a
nervousness
deeper
out of my
shadow
voice.
shifting against the
We can
blackness.
figure it out in the morning.
Max's growl
Eliza
intensified.
reluctantly agreed.
Come on.
We found a relatively
I said,
flat
suddenly
spot
eager
just
for the
off the
illusory
trail
safety
and
of
quickly set
nylon
up our
walls.
tent as darkness
I
fell
guided
around
him
us.
into our tent
I
and
worked
zipped
the
on
door
starting
shut,
a fire while
irrationally
Eliza
relieved to
organized
have
our
even
sleeping
that
gear
flimsy
and
barrier
fed
between
Finn.
us and whatever
The
lurked
fire
outside.
refused to catch properly.
Sleep came
Despite
fitfully
using
that
the
night.
fire starter
I
kit
dreamed
that
of
had
running
never
through
failed us
endless
before.
woods,
The
pursuing
flames sputtered
or
and
being
died
pursued.
repeatedly.
I couldn't tell which.
When I finally got it going,
the trees
the
whispered
fire
names
burned
that
with
weren't
an odd
mine,
bluish tint
and somewhere
instead
ahead,
of the warm
a light
orange I
pulsed with the
expected.
rhythm of a heartbeat.
That's strange. I
Eliza
woke several
remarked,
times to
staring at the
Max's
flames.
alert posture. Must be
His
something in
ears
the
pricked
wood
toward sounds I couldn't hear.
We ate a simple dinner
When morning
of trail mix
finally
and energy
came,
bars.
I emerged
Neither
from
of
my
us
tent to
particularly
find Thomas
hungry despite
already
the
up.
day's exertion.
Boiling water
Finn
on a small
lay
stove.
between us.
He
Still
nodded
on
in
edge,
greeting,
his
but
eyes
said nothing.
constantly scanning
The
the
shadows
darkness
under his
beyond
eyes
our
suggesting
campsite.
his night had been no
As
more
we
restful
prepared for
than
bed,
mine.
Eliza pulled
The
out the leather
Winslow's were
pouch
still in
Walter
their
had
tent,
given her.
though I could hear movement inside.
Maybe we should
I
hang
checked
this
my phone.
somewhere.
No
She
signal,
said,
as
only
expected.
half joking.
Then pulled out my GPS
Can't
to mark
hurt,
our location
I
and
replied,
plan
more
the day's
sincere
route.
than I would have been that
I
morning.
frowned at the screen.
She hung it from the center loop of
That's
our
not
tent
right.
before crawling
I
into
muttered,
her sleeping
tapping the
bag.
device.
I joined
Thomas
her
looked up.
after ensuring the
Problem.
fire was safely contained.
Though
GPS
it
says
was
we're
still
about 2
burning
miles
that
northeast of where we
unnatural
should
blue
be.
color.
That's impossible.
Sleep didn't come easily.
I'd hiked in from
Every
the
sound
southwest
from the
yesterday,
forest seemed amplified
following
in the
the clearly
darkness.
marked trail.
Every crack of a
The
twig
unit
had been working
every rustle of
perfectly.
leaves. Let me see. At some
Thomas
point, I
said,
must have
coming
drifted
over.
off because I
He
was
studied
jolted
the
awake
screen,
by
then
Finn's
pulled
growling.
out his own GPS.
The dog was standing at
device
the entrance
showed
of the
the same
tent,
erroneous
his
location.
hackles raised as he stared
That's
into the night.
Interesting.
Beside me, Eliza
Interesting isn't
slept
the word I'd
peacefully,
use.
unaware
Concerning,
of my
maybe.
wakefulness or
These
Finn's
should be
agitation.
accurate to within a few meters.
What is it? Before we
Boy,
could discuss it
I
further,
whispered, sitting
the
up
Winslows
slowly.
emerged from their tent.
Finn's growl
Liam
deepened,
immediately
and he
ran to Max,
bark.
who suffered the
Sharp,
child's enthusiastic
urgent sounds
petting
that
with
finally woke
dignified
Eliza.
patience. Morning.
What's going on?
James called
She mumbled,
cheerfully,
reaching for her headlamp.
Everyone sleep okay?
I don't know.
Fine.
Something's bothering
I lied,
Finn.
not wanting to mention my
We both
disturbing
listened
dreams or the
intently.
GPS anomaly.
At first, I heard nothing
Anyone
unusual,
want coffee?
but then it came.
I've got extra.
A sound that made my blood
As
run
we shared a
cold.
simple breakfast,
A voice,
I noticed
distant
Emma
but
seemed
clear,
subdued,
calling
picking
what
at her
sounded like
instant
my
oatmeal
name.
without enthusiasm.
Marcus.
Everything okay,
It was less a
sweetie?
voice than
I
a
asked.
breath.
She
Barely
glanced at her
audible
parents
above the
before
night sounds
answering.
of the forest.
I heard someone
Did you
walking
hear
around
that?
our tent
I
last
whispered
night.
to Eliza.
They were whispering. She nodded,
Sarah frowned,
her face pale in
Honey,
the glow of her
you were
headlamp.
dreaming.
No
It
one was
sounded like-
outside. Marcus, I wasn't dreaming.
The call came
Emma
again.
insisted. They
Slightly
kept saying,
closer this
"Come
time.
out, come out." Finn's barking became
frantic.
frantic. An uncomfortable silence
Eliza
fell
gripped
over
my
the group.
arm,
her fingers
I saw
digging
Thomas
into my
watching the
skin.
girl
intently. We need to see what
Probably
it is.
just the wind,
I said.
James
Though
said
everything in me
finally, too
wanted to stay
brightly.
hidden in the
Makes
tent.
all kinds of weird
Are
sounds
you
in
crazy?
the trees.
Eliza hissed.
It wasn't the
We're
wind.
not going out
Emma
there.
muttered.
but
the
let the
voice
subject
called again.
drop, and this time it was unmistakably my name. The Winslow's planned to head to the summit and back in one day, then drive home. I reached for my own headlamp continuing north along the Appalachian Trail. I had originally intended to climb to the summit as well, the tent after but the GPS malfunction made me hesitate. Please, I think I'll explore around the lake today. Unzipping the tent. I told them, driven something's wrong with my GPS and an inexplicable I want to make sure I can navigate the source before going farther. Outside, our fire had died to embers that still glowed with that strange blue light. The summit trail is well marked, barely enough illumination to see the immediate area around our campsite. We all decided to hike together to the lake, and drew the hunting knife from its according to our plans. The blade seemed pitifully inadequate against the vastness of the dark hiking weather. But it was all I had. Trotted ahead, occasionally disappearing around bends in the trail, only to reappear moments later, checking on me. Who's there? The Winslow children seemed to have forgotten the night's unease. Even the normal forest running ahead had ceased, boundless as if the woods were holding its breath. We'd been hiking about 40 somewhere minutes to my right trail came the sound of breaking undergrowth, as if something large was moving toward me, reflecting the surrounding autumn flash of movement about 20 yards away. It was breathtaking. A pale shape ducking behind a tree. I immediately pulled out my camera. It had been too quick for me to make out details, but it had appeared roughly coming to stand beside me as I framed the shot. I called, anger momentarily overriding fear. I agreed. Show yourself. We continued around the eastern shore of the lake, where Eliza's frightened voice came from the tent behind led up toward Blood Mountain retreat when the shape moved again, continued around the lake, time stepping partially into the beam of my headlamp. What I saw you don't want to join us for the summit? James asked. It looked human. The views are supposed to be spectacular. Too thin. Its limbs jointed in places, limbs but Max was acting strangely. Its skin was staring into the woods with his hackles absorb and reflect the light in unnatural ways. I think I'll stick with my plan. Its face. Maybe tomorrow, after I figure out what's wrong with my GPS, was the worst part. We exchanged features that approximated the human face, but they were arranged in a way that made my mind recoil. The eyes of Winslow and Thomas started up the summit trail too wide in what might have been an attempt at a smile. I might not see some of them, and yet, despite its wrongness, Max and I spent the morning circumnavigating the lake, as if it were wearing a distorted version of my own face. The tranquility of the place worked its magic. It called and I began to dismiss my earlier apprehensions as nothing more than lingering stress from the divorce, combined with Thomas's ominous nearly falling in my haste to get away from the thing. Around noon, we took a break on a rocky outcrop, and I saw that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. I shared a protein as if bar it were partially floating above the forest checked floor. My GPS again. Marcus! It now showed us in a completely different location. I turned and ran back from our actual position, practically diving through the entrance. I frowned. My hands shook so badly I could barely zip it closed behind me. Clouds had begun moving in from the west. What did you see? Dark and threatening, Eliza demanded. The forecast had mentioned a chance of afternoon showers. Before I could answer, a low, eerie laugh came from just outside the harbingers of a genuine storm. Finn whimpered and pressed himself against Eliza's side. Our original campsite to set up before the rain hit. I whispered urgently. We were about halfway back when the first rumble of thunder echoed across the lake. Max whined, pressing against my leg. We stuffed our essentials into our packs as several degrees in moments, while the thing outside grew unnaturally dark as the storm clouds. Occasional flashes of pale movement showed through the tent fabric when it passed near a dead fire. We'll be fine. Ready? The rain started as a light patter against the leaves so tightly my knuckles were white, quickly intensified until Eliza pouring through the canopy, clutching Finn's leash with one hand and Walter's leather pouch with the other. Despite my rain I noticed she'd removed it from where she'd hung it earlier. Now slick with mud. 3 became treacherous. 1. Max stayed close as miserable as I was. I unzipped the tent and we burst out, expecting to confront the by a deafening crack of thunder. But our campsite was empty. Too close. The only evidence of disturbance was our fire pit, where the stones had been rearranged passing a small cabin earlier pattern set back from the lake 100 yards in the center. It didn't waste time pondering but at this point, any roof with my headlamp lighting the way, turning off the main trail, I tried to retrace our steps toward where I thought the cabin we were. The rain made it difficult to see far ahead, asked once we put some distance between us and the camp to follow. I tried to describe what seemed like an eternity of slogging through the downpour. It looked like I was about to give up, like a twisted version of me, and darted forward. I finally said, "Max!" Like something was wearing my face, hurrying didn't quite know how to make it fit. He stopped at the edge of a small clearing, and there it was, a skinwalker I'd glimpsed earlier. Like in the Navajo legends, simultaneously more dilapidated and more recently used than I'd thought. The log structure was weathered with moss growing on the north face human form. But smoke rose from the stone change. but the
I
fear
hesitated.
is universal.
Trespassing on someone's
We
property
continued
wasn't
down the
part
trail,
of my plan,
moving as quickly
but
as we
the
dared in the
storm was
darkness.
only intensifying.
My headlamp created
Another
a tunnel
lightning
of light in
strike
front of us,
close enough
but
to
I
make
was
the
acutely
hair on my
aware
arm
of how
stand
small
up.
that illumination
Made the
was
decision
compared
for
to the
me.
vast darkness
I approached the
surrounding
cabin
us.
and knocked on the rough
At
wooden
some
door.
point, no
Finn
answer.
stopped abruptly.
I knocked again,
His body rigid
louder.
with attention.
Hello?
We halted
Is anyone
behind
home?
him, listening.
I'm caught in the storm
At first,
and
I
need
heard
shelter.
nothing. But then it came.
After another moment
a sound
of silence,
like multiple
I tested
voices
the door.
whispering just at the
It
edge
swung
of
open
hearing.
with a creak that seemed
The words
straight
were
out of a horror
indistinct,
movie.
but the tone was
Max
unmistakably
growled
hostile.
softly, his body
Keep moving,
tense.
Eliza urged.
It's okay,
Pulling
I
gently
whispered,
on
though I
Finn's
wasn't
leash.
sure if I was reassuring
But
him
the
or
dog
myself.
wouldn't budge.
Hello?
He
I
stared
called
into
again
the
as we
darkness
stepped
beside
inside.
the trail. The cabin's
continuous
interior
low growl
was dim,
emanating
but
from his
surprisingly
throat.
cozy. The whispering
fire
grew
burned
louder,
low in the
more
hearth,
insistent, casting dancing
Now
shadows across
I
the
could make
single
out
room.
words.
Simple
My
furniture, a table
Eliza's
with two
name.
chairs, a narrow
Please
bed
and
in the
threats
corner,
intermixed
a
in a
rocking chair
cacophony
near the
of
voices
voices
that seemed to
filled
come
the
from
space
everywhere
without crowding
and
it.
nowhere.
Bundles
We
of
need to
dried
run,
herbs
I
hung
said,
from the
grabbing
rafters,
Eliza's hand, filling the air with
We
an
sprinted
aromatic
down the
mixture
trail.
of rosemary,
Finn finally
thyme,
jolted into motion
and
by
something
our
else
sudden
I couldn't
movement.
identify. The voices pursued us.
Well, don't
growing
just
more
stand
frenzied,
there dripping on
more
my floor,
desperate as
dear.
we fled.
Come in properly
Branches
and shut the
whipped at
door.
our faces. Roots
I nearly
threatened to
jumped
trip
out of
us,
my
but
skin.
fear drove us
A
onward.
woman
had appeared silently
Just when I thought
from my
my lungs
now
would
realized
burst,
was a
the
small
trail
pantry
opened
alcove.
onto a wider
She was
path.
perhaps in her 60s.
Ahead,
with
I could see
silver-streaked
moonlight
black hair
reflecting
pulled
off
into
water,
a bun and
lake,
penetrating dark
Winfield,
eyes
Scott.
that seemed to look straight
Somehow,
through me. We'd found our way.
Despite her
after
age,
all.
she moved with
the
fluid
voices
grace
faded
as
as
she
we approached the
approached.
lake, eventually
I'm
disappearing
sorry,
entirely.
I stammered.
We
I didn't
slowed
mean
to
to
a walk,
intrude,
both of
the
us
storm.
gasping for breath.
No need to explain.
We made it,
She cut
Eliza
me off,
panted, gesturing
bending
toward
over
the
with
fire.
her hands on her knees.
Nature has her moods.
The lake was beautiful
Go
in
on,
the moonlight.
warm yourself.
Its surface
Your
perfectly
dog too,
still,
though he doesn't
reflecting
seem
the
to
full
like my
moon
home
that
hung
much.
low in the sky.
Indeed,
Max remained
Wait.
near the door,
Full
his
moon?
posture rigid.
I
I distinctly
fixed on the
remember
woman.
checking the lunar calendar
Max,
before our
it's
trip.
okay, I
It should
said,
have been a
patting
quarter
my
moon
leg.
tonight. Reluctantly, he
As
came
I
to my
stared at the
side,
reflected
kept his
moon,
attention on
I
our
realized
hostess. Something else
Smart
was wrong,
animal,
she remarked.
The shoreline we'd
They
reached
sense
wasn't
things,
developed
don't
with the
they?
campgrounds
I'm
and
Eleanor
facilities I
Blackwood, by
expected
the
from
way,
the state park.
and you would be? Instead,
The
the
forest
forest
came
came right up to the water's
Thank you for
edge,
letting us in.
wild and
Not at
primeval.
all.
I don't get many visitors,
Eliza,
especially this
I
time
said
of year.
slowly.
She
I don't
moved
think
to the
this is
fire,
Lake Winfield,
adding a
Scott.
log with practiced ease.
She looked
around. You're soaked
Frowning.
through. Let me
No
find you something
campgrounds.
dry to
No
wear while your
facilities.
clothes dry by the fire. She pulled out her map,
Before I could
illuminating it with
protest,
her headlamp.
she
disappeared into the pantry
After studying
again,
it for a
and
moment,
returned
she
with a
looked up
simple
with
linen
confusion
dress.
in
her eyes. This should fit.
There's no lake
marked
marked
behind
here.
that screen.
Not
where we should be. She pointed to
That's
a folding
impossible.
wooden screen in the
We
corner
followed
that
the
I
trail.
hadn't noticed before.
I know.
I'll make
But
us some tea. She traced our route
the dress
with her
didn't
finger.
fit,
According
almost
to this,
perfectly,
we
which
should
I
still
found
be at least a
odd
mile
given
from
our
Lake
different
Winfield,
builds.
Scott.
And
Eleanor
there's definitely
was
no
willowy
other
and
lake
tall,
marked on the trail.
while I'm more average in
A
height
sense of
and
unreality
athletic.
washed over
But the
me.
warm,
How
dry
could we be
fabric
standing
was
at the
welcome
shore of
against
a
my
lake
skin.
that didn't exist
so I
on our
didn't
map?
question it. Finn whined,
When I
pressing
emerged,
against my legs.
my wet clothes
when I looked
hung
down
on
at
a rack
him,
near the fire,
he was staring
and
across
Eleanor
the
was
lake.
pouring amber
His ears
liquid from a
flattened
cast
against
iron
his
kettle
head.
into two
I followed his
earthenware
gaze
mugs.
and felt my heart
Herb
stop.
tea,
she explained,
on the other
handing me
side
a
of the
mug,
lake,
arranged
own
along the
blend,
shoreline,
good for warming
were
the blood
dozens
and
of
settling
pale
the
figures
nerves.
similar to the one I'd seen
The
at our
tea
campsite.
smelled strongly of mint.
They
and
stood
something
perfectly
else,
still,
sweet,
watching us,
but with a bitter undertone.
Even from this distance,
I took a cautious
I
sip.
could see the wrongness
It
in
was
their
actually
proportions,
quite pleasant,
the unnatural
warming me from the
angles of
inside
their
out.
limbs. You're not
We need
from
to
around
go,
here,
I
Eleanor
whispered,
said, unable to tear my
It
eyes
wasn't a
away from the
question.
nightmarish gathering. Atlanta, I
Now.
replied. Just hiking
Eliza
for a few
saw them
days.
too.
I met
She
a family
clutched
on
my
the
arm,
trail,
her
the
fingers
Winslows,
digging painfully
and another
into my
hiker named
flesh.
Thomas.
What are they?
Something flickered in
I don't
Eleanor's
know.
eyes at the
And
mention
I don't
of
want to
Thomas,
find out.
but her
Let's get
expression
back to the
remained
trail.
pleasant. But as we turned to
yes.
leave,
I believe
we
I've
found
seen
our
that young
path
man
blocked.
before.
Keeps
Standing
to himself,
not
10 feet
doesn't
away,
he?
was a woman.
The family.
Or
They have
something
children?
that resembled a woman.
Yes.
Two. Unlike the pale
Emma
creatures
and
across the
Liam.
lake, she appeared fully
Eleanor
human.
nodded slowly.
Dressed in
Children
old-fashioned clothes
love
that
these
might
woods.
have been
They
fashionable
see
a
what
century
adults
ago.
have forgotten how to
Her gray
see.
hair was pulled back
She took
in a
a sip of
severe
her
bun,
tea. and her face was over the rim of her mug, but her eyes were young and alert. "What brings you to Blood Mountain?
You shouldn't be
Eliza
here,"
Crawford, she said.
Most
Her voice
hikers come in the
strong
summer
and
months.
Clear. This
I
place
explained
isn't
about
for your
my photography,
Not tonight.
leaving out the part about the
Finn
divorce.
growled, but made
Something
no move
made
to
me
approach the
reluctant
woman.
to share too much personal
Who are
information
you?
with this
Eliza
strange,
demanded.
intense woman.
Surreptitiously
A
reaching
seeker
for
of
Walter's
beauty.
leather pouch, she said approvingly.
Names
The
have
mountain has much
power
to show
here.
those with
The
eyes
woman
to see.
replied cryptically.
But you should be careful.
You can call me
There are
Agnes.
places up there where the
Agnes
veil
Blackwood.
grows thin,
and you'd best
especially
come with me
now
if you want to see
with
morning.
the blood moon approaching.
Why should we trust you?
My conversation
I asked,
with
positioning
Thomas
myself
came
slightly
flooding
in
back.
front of Eliza.
You believe those
Agnes's
stories
eyes
too?
flicked to the pale figures
Eleanor's
across
smile
the lake.
didn't reach her
Because
eyes.
they're coming.
Belief has
And
nothing
trust
to
me,
do
boy,
with truth, my
you don't
dear.
want to be here when they
These
arrive.
mountains were old when the first
As if
humans
on
walked
cue,
between their
I
trees.
noticed movement on the
They
lake.
have their own rules.
The creatures were
their
entering
own
the
appetites.
water, moving toward us
A chill
with an
ran
unnatural
through me
gliding
despite
motion
the
that
fire's
barely
warmth.
disturbed the surface.
Max whined
This way,
softly,
Agnes
pressing
commanded,
against my
turning
leg.
and heading into the
I should
forest.
go, I said,
Quickly
suddenly
now.
uncomfortable.
We followed
The
her,
rain
driven
seems
by
to be
the
letting
greater
up.
fear of the approaching creatures.
Indeed,
The drumming on the roof
Agnes
had
moved
lessened
with
to a
surprising
gentle
speed
patter for her apparent
but
age.
Eleanor made no
leading
move
us
to
along a
return
narrow
my
path
clothes,
that
which
I
were
would
still
have noticed
damp.
on my own. Nonsense.
The trees
The
seemed to
storm
part
will pick up
before
again
her,
soon,
closing behind us
Besides,
as we
it's nearly
passed.
dusk. These
After
woods are
several
no
minutes
place
of
to be
hurried
wandering
travel,
after dark. We emerged into
her
a
tone
small
was
clearing
gentle but
dominated
firm.
by a cabin
You'll
that
stay
looked
here
as old
tonight.
as the surrounding
I insist.
forest. Your friends
Smoke
might even
curled
find
from
their
its
way
stone
here
chimney,
if the storm drove
and
them
warm
back
light
from the
summit.
spilled from its windows. As if to punctuate
Inside,
her words,
Agnes
thunder
ordered,
rumbled
holding
in the
the door
distance,
open for
and
us.
the rain intensified.
The interior
again.
of the cabin was a
I found
single room
myself
dominated by a
reluctantly
large
agreeing to stay,
fireplace.
so Max's
Bundles
continuing
of dried
unease
herbs
nagged
hung
at
from
me.
the ceiling
Eleanor
beams,
proved
and
to be a
shelves
surprisingly
lined with jars
gracious
of
hostess.
unidentifiable contents
She prepared a
covered
simple
one
but
wall.
delicious stew for dinner.
A rough wooden
served
table
with
and
crusty
several
bread
chairs
that she claimed
occupied
to
the
have
center
baked
of
that
the room.
morning. While a narrow
Throughout
bed
the
stood
meal,
in one
she
corner.
asked questions about my life,
Sid,
my work,
Agnes
my
said,
family,
gesturing to the
showing
table as she
particular
closed
interest
and
in
bolted
whether
the door
I had
behind
children
us.
or planned to.
They won't come here.
Not yet,
Not
I
to my
admitted.
home. Feeling
We sat,
a pang
exhausted
at the thought
and
of the family
confused.
I'd once hoped to
Finn
build with
settled
Andrew.
at our feet, still alert
As
but
night
calmer
fell
now that
completely
we were
outside,
indoors.
making the
Who are
cabin's
you?
windows into
Eliza
black
asked
mirrors,
again.
Eleanor told
What are those
stories
things
of the
out
mountain.
there?
Legends
Agnes
that sounded
busied herself
similar
at
to
the
what Thomas had
fireplace,
mentioned,
adding wood
but
to
with
the flames
subtle
before
differences.
responding. In
I
her
told you who
telling,
I am. The mountain
As for
wasn't
them,
simply a place of
she turned to
bloodshed,
face us, her
but a
expression
sentient
grim.
entity that required payment
They have many
for safe
names.
passage. The Cherokee called them the old
Nununui.
families knew this.
The stone
she
people.
said. Her face
Settlers who
shadowed
came
in the
later
firelight
called
them different things.
They left
offerings at certain places, crossroads, creek forks,
all inadequate
stone
names for what they
circles.
truly are. Nothing valuable
And what
by
are they
human
truly?
standards.
I pressed.
Just small
Agnes
tokens of
sat
respect.
down across from us.
But the new people,
They
the
are
tourists
echoes,
and through hikers,
reflections.
they take and take
Pieces of the
without giving
world
back.
that should have been forgotten,
And
so
but
the
weren't.
mountain takes from them instead.
And they hunger for one thing.
Takes what?
To be
I
real
asked,
again.
my mouth dry,
To
despite
take
the
the place
tea I'd
of
been
the
drinking
living.
steadily. She looked
Eleanor
directly
smiled,
at me, and in the flickering light, her
That's
teeth
why one
seemed
of them
sharper
wears
than
your
they
face,
should
young
be.
man.
Whatever it
It
needs,
wants to
Eliza,
become you.
whatever it hungers for.
A chill ran through me at her words.
I was saved from
How
having
do you
to
know
respond
about
by
that?
pounding at the door.
I know many things.
Max immediately leapt
Just
to his
as I
feet,
knew you would
barking
come to the lake
furiously.
tonight.
Eleanor seemed
lake that
unsurprised
isn't on our
by the
map.
interruption. Eliza interjected.
More lost
How is that
souls,
possible?
she murmured, rising
Agnes
gracefully
smiled
to answer the
thinly.
door.
Blood Mountain
The
has
Winslow
many
family
secrets.
stood huddled on
the
the
lake
porch,
appears only during the
drenched
blood
and
moon,
miserable
and only
looking.
to those marked by the
James
stone
supported
people.
Sarah, who
She
appeared to be
nodded
limping
toward my pack.
Thank
You've
God,
seen their sign, haven't
James
you?
exclaimed when he
The
saw
stone
me.
circles. We thought we were lost
I
for
nodded
sure.
slowly.
Eleanor ushered
saw
them
several
inside
of
with
them
the
on the
same
trail.
insistent hospitality
The
she'd
first
shown
one
me.
marked you.
The
Children,
second confirmed
you're
their
soaked to the
interest.
bone.
The third,
Come,
the one they
by the
left at your
fire.
campsite,
I have
dry
sealed your
clothes
fate.
and hot food. She looked thoughtful.
As
As the Winslows dried off
would
and
have,
changed
if
into
you hadn't
clothes
received
that
help.
Eleanor somehow had ready,
Eliza pulled out
clothes
Walter's
that,
leather
like
pouch.
mine, fit each
You
of
mean
them
this?
surprisingly well. Agnes
They
took
explained
it,
what had
examining it
happened.
closely. They'd reached the
Medicine
summit
pouch,
with Thomas, but on
old
the way
protection.
down, the storm hit
She
hard.
handed it
back. Sarah had slipped
It
on wet
confused them,
rocks and
bought you
twisted her
time.
ankle. Then
Who gave it
they'd
to you?
somehow gotten off the main trail.
A man named Walter
Without
Keegan,
GPS,
I replied.
Theirs had malfunctioned.
We met him
just
at the
like
Blood
mine,
Mountain shelter.
and with darkness approaching, Agnes's
They'd been
expression
on the verge of
softened
panic
slightly
when
they spotted smoke
Walt's
from
a good
Eleanor's
man.
chimney. Been hiking these mountains
Thomas
for decades.
wanted to keep going.
Knows their dangers
James better
explained
than
as he
most.
accepted a bowl of stew.
So, what happens said we were close to the
Eliza
lake.
asked, her voice
But with
small.
Sarah's ankle and the
Are we
kids
trapped
exhausted,
here?
I wasn't
No,
taking chances.
Agnes
said firmly.
Where is he
But
now?
you must wait
I
until
asked,
dawn. Suddenly concerned.
The blood moon rules
James
the night.
shrugged, but its
Kept
power
going his
fades
own
with
way.
the sun. Stubborn guy.
And then what?
I pressed.
Eleanor served everyone
We just
food
continue
and
our
more
hike
special
as if
tea.
nothing
Paying
happened.
particular attention to
Agnes
the children.
fixed me with a stern gaze.
Growing bodies need
You'll
nourishment.
leave these mountains
She
and
cooed,
never return.
ruffling Liam's hair in a
Particularly
gesture
not
that
during
made
the
the boy
blood moon.
shrink back slightly.
You've been marked now.
As we ate,
They'll always find
I
you
noticed
here.
Emma staring at Eleanor
We
with
fell silent,
undisguised
processing her
fascination.
words.
The
Are you a
reality of our
witch?
situation
The
was
girl
beginning
asked
to sink
abruptly.
in.
Emma,
We'd encountered something
Sarah gasped.
supernatural.
That's incredibly
Something that
rude.
defied rational
But Eleanor
explanation.
just laughed.
A melodious
according
sound
to
that
Agnes,
somehow raised the
it
hairs
wanted
on
to
the
take
back
my
of my
place
neck.
in the world.
What a delightful
Why
question.
me? I
Some
finally
might
asked.
call me that.
Why not
I
Eliza?
suppose, or someone
I prefer
else? Keeper of old
Agnes
ways.
studied me
I
for
know
a
the
long
plants
moment
that heal
before
and the words that
answering.
comfort. The stone
Is that
people
witchcraft
are
to
drawn
you?
to those with
Emma nodded
incompleteness. You have a
Empty
witch's
spaces in the
cottage,
soul that
and
they
you knew
can
we
fill.
were coming. Her
A
eyes
strange
seemed to
tension
peer into
filled
me.
the room.
Seeing things
Eleanor's
I kept
smile
hidden
remained
even
fixed,
from myself.
but her eyes hardened
You have
slightly.
doubts about your place
The
in
mountain
the world.
tells me things,
about your
child.
worthiness, just as it might
I
speak
wanted
to
to
you
deny
if
it,
you listened
but
properly.
couldn't.
She'd identified
After
a truth
dinner,
I barely
Eleanor
acknowledged
insisted
we all
myself.
stay the night.
The constant
arranging
feeling that I was
sleeping
somehow
places
not enough,
throughout
that
cabin.
I was an imposter in my
The
own
Winslows
life.
took the bed with
The
Emma
stone
on a
people
pallet
sensed
beside
that
them.
vulnerability,
Liam was given
Agnes
a small cot
continued.
near the pantry.
They're drawn to it like
I was
moths
to sleep on a
flame.
mat near the fire
Eliza
with Max
took my
beside
hand,
me, squeezing it reassuringly.
Rest now.
Eleanor
He's
said
stronger
as she
than
dimmed
he
the oil
thinks.
lamps. Agnes
The
nodded.
storm passes.
He'll need to be.
But the night holds its own
The
dangers.
night passed slowly.
I lay awake
Agnes made us
long
tea
after
from
everyone
herbs
else
she'd
seemed to be
gathered
sleeping,
herself, including
bitter
Eleanor,
taste
oddly
who had
comforting.
retreated to what she
We
called her
dozed fitfully at the
meditation
table,
space behind
jumping
the
at every
pantry.
sound from outside
Max
the cabin.
remained alert beside
Occasionally, we heard
His eyes
scratching at the
reflecting
walls
the
or
dying
windows,
embers of the
as
fire.
if something was testing for
Something
weaknesses.
felt wrong.
But nothing breached the tea
Agnes's
had left a
sanctuary.
strange aftertaste. And my
As
thoughts
the
seemed
first
gray light
sluggish,
of dawn seeped
dreamlike.
through the cabin's small windows.
I found myself
Agnes
replaying
rose and
Eleanor's
began
stories,
gathering
her
supplies.
warnings about the mountain's
It's almost
hunger.
time, she
The way
said,
she
handing
looked
us
at the
each a small
children.
bundle wrapped in cloth.
I must have drifted off
Take
eventually
these
because the next
protective
thing I
herbs.
knew,
Keep
Max
them with
was
you
standing
until you're
over
well
me,
away from
Blood
whining
Mountain.
urgently. She also
The
gave
fire
us a
had
new
died
map,
completely,
hand-drawn on leaving the
parchment-like
cabin in
paper.
darkness save for a faint glow
This will
coming
lead you
from behind
safely
the
back
pantry.
to your car.
I
Do
checked
not
my
stray
watch.
from the path I've marked,
3:17
no matter what
a.m.
you see or hear.
As my eyes adjusted to the
Thank you,
darkness, I
Eliza said
realized
sincerely,
Liam's cot was
for
empty.
everything.
Alarmed, I
Agnes
got up as
waved away
quietly
her
as possible
gratitude.
and checked the main
Thank
door.
Walt Keegan for
Still
sending you my
bolted
way.
from the inside.
Now come,
The only
while the
windows
morning
were
is still
shuttered
young.
and latched.
She
Where
led
could the
us
boy
outside.
have gone? The
A
forest
soft
looked
sound
benign
from
in
the
growing
pantry
daylight.
caught my attention.
No sign of the horrors
Moving
we'd witnessed
cautiously
during the
with
night.
Max
at my heels.
Remember,
I approached the narrow
Agnes
doorway
said
as she pointed us
Beyond
toward
the
the pantry
path
with
marked
its
on her
hanging
map.
bundles of herbs
Stay on
and
this
shelves
route.
of
Don't
jars
look
was
back.
another door.
Don't stop until you
Slightly
reach your
ajar,
vehicle.
golden light
Will we
spilling
ever
through the
see
crack.
you again?
Eliza
I
hesitated, torn
Agnes's
between
smile
respecting
was sad.
Eleanor's privacy and concern
Best
for
for
all
Liam.
if you don't. A
She
child's
looked
voice
directly at
decided
me.
Remember what I
Liam,
said, speaking in a
They're
monotone
drawn
unlike
to
his
emptiness.
normal excited chatter.
Fill yourself
I
with
couldn't make
purpose,
out the words,
with love,
but the sound
with
sent
certainty,
ice through my
and
veins.
they'll find
no purchase
Pushing
in
the
you.
door open wider,
I
with
found
those
myself
words of
looking down a
advice
short
she
set of
sent us
stairs
on our
into
way.
a cellar I wouldn't
The journey
have
back
guessed
to our
existed.
car was uneventful.
The space below was
Almost
illuminated by
eerily so.
dozens of candles. We saw no
Their
other
light
hikers
reflecting
encountered
off what
no
appeared to be a
obstacles.
large copper
Even
basin in the
Finn
center of the
seemed
room.
relaxed.
Eleanor stood
trotting
with her back to
alongside
me,
us as if
hair
the previous
now
night's
loose and
terror
flowing
had been
past her
nothing but a
waist,
bad dream.
wearing a deep red robe.
But it hadn't been a dream.
Before her, Liam
the memory
stood
of that
perfectly
pale
still,
creature wearing my
eyes
distorted
vacant,
face,
wearing
still
only his
haunts me.
underwear.
Sometimes,
The blood
in unguarded
remembers,
moments, I catch
Eleanor was
glimpses
saying,
of it in
her
mirrors
voice
or
deeper than
reflective
before,
surfaces, resonant
a flash
with
of
power.
movement
just at the edge of my
flesh
vision.
knows.
Gone
Tell
when I
me
turned
what
to
you
look
see.
directly at
Child.
it. Eliza and I
Darkness,
don't talk
Liam
much about
replied
what
in that
happened
same
on Blood
empty
Mountain.
voice.
Roots we returned to
reaching through
Atlanta
stone.
and our normal lives,
Hunger
but
without end.
something had changed between us.
And what does it hunger for?
She watches me sometimes, a
warmth,
question in her eyes
the
that
spark
neither
that
of us
burns
dares
to
beating
voice.
hearts.
Is it really
Eleanor
you?
nodded approvingly. I ask myself the same
Yes.
question in the dark
And
hours
tonight we
before
begin to
dawn,
feed it, as
when
my
I
mothers
wake
have done for
gasping
300
from nightmares
years.
of pale
The blood
figures in a
moon
lake that
comes,
shouldn't
and
exist.
with it,
Am
the
I still
thinning of the
completely
veil.
myself? She
Or
raised
did
a
the
hand
creature
in
take
which
something
gleamed a
from me that
curved
night?
knife, some
Without
essential
thinking, thinking I'd burst through the door.
Stop!
Agnes's parting
Eleanor
words
turned,
echoed
and in
my
the candlelight
mind
her
during
face
these
was
moments of
transformed.
doubt. Younger
Fill
somehow,
yourself with
more
purpose,
beautiful, but
with
terrible
love,
in its cold
with
perfection.
certainty.
The photographer, God
she
knows
said,
I'm
sounding
trying.
mildly annoyed.
Eliza helps. I thought
Her
the
love
tea
is an
would keep
anchor
you
in the
asleep
storm
long
of
of my
my
fears. Get away
But
from
sometimes
him.
when I look at
demanded,
the
moving
moon,
down the stairs,
I feel it calling to me.
Max followed, drawing me
A
back to
continuous
Blood
growl
Mountain,
rumbling
to
from
the
its
creatures
chest.
waiting there. You
And I wonder if
misunderstand.
maybe
Just
Eleanor
maybe
said
a part of me
calmly.
wants to
I'm
answer
not
that
going to
call,
harm the boy.
to return to
He's
the
merely
stone
a vessel
people and finally
a
confront
mouthpiece.
the emptiness they found
The first
in me.
offering is always blood,
So far,
freely
I've
given.
resisted. But
She
the
held
blood
up her
moon
other
will rise
hand,
again,
which I now
and
saw
when it
was
does,
already cut
I
across
don't know
the
if I'll be
palm.
strong enough to stay
Blood
away.
dripping into the copper basin.
Liam, come here, I called, but the boy didn't respond, didn't even blink. He can't hear you, Eleanor said. He walks between worlds now, as children sometimes can. Did you never wonder why so many legends feature lost children, Eliza? They cross boundaries more easily than adults, their souls still remembering the darkness from which all life emerges. She turned back to Liam. Now, child, take the knife. The first cut is yours to make. To my horror, Liam reached for the blade with mechanical precision. Max, guard, I commanded, and my loyal shepherd sprang forward, planting himself between Liam and Eleanor, teeth bared. Eleanor's beautiful face contorted with anger. Call off your beast, or I promise you'll watch him die screaming. What have you done to the boy? I demanded, edging closer, looking for an opening to grab Liam. Nothing permanent, yet. She made a subtle gesture with her bleeding hand, and to my shock, Max yelped and backed away as if struck. The next will not be a warning. A scream from upstairs interrupted whatever she planned next, Sarah's voice high with panic. Liam, Emma, James. Eleanor's concentration broke for just an instant, but it was enough. I lunged forward, grabbing Liam around the waist and dragging him backward toward the stairs. The boy struggled weakly, still in his trance-like state. Foolish woman, Eleanor hissed, all pretense of the kindly hostess gone. My name is Eliza Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in October 2024. I've tried to forget what occurred in the Cohuta wilderness, but the memories haunt me like a disease. Sometimes I wake up at night, convinced that I can smell the distinctive rot of that place. Decaying leaves mingled
Every
with
corner
something
held
far
memories
more
I couldn't
sinister.
face.
My
The
therapist
kitchen where we
suggested
danced
I write it
while
all
cooking
down
Sunday
as
breakfast.
part of my healing
The living
process.
room where we'd binge watch
I don't
shows
believe it will
curled
heal
under the
anything,
same blanket.
but maybe someone will find
Even
this
Max,
account and think
my
twice
German
before
shepherd,
venturing too
seemed
deep
to be
into
waiting
those
for Andrew
Georgia
to walk
mountains.
through the door.
His
I'd never
ears
been
perking
much
up
of an
at every
outdoors
sound
woman
in the
before
hallway.
that trip.
So when
Growing
October
up in
came,
suburban
I
Atlanta,
packed my gear,
my
wilderness
loaded Max into my
experiences were
Subaru,
limited to
and headed
well-maintained
north
state
to Blood
parks
Mountain.
and the occasional overnight
The name
camp as a
should have been
teenager.
my first warning,
But after my
I
divorce
dismissed
from
it as
Ryan
just
last
another
spring,
colorful
an
Appalachian
ugly,
moniker,
protracted affair that
like
left me
Bald
emotionally
Mountain
drained
or Grassy
and
Gap.
questioning everything.
As a
My
wildlife
best friend
photographer,
Becca
I'd
insisted
hiked
that I
most of
needed
Georgia's
to
wilderness
reconnect
areas,
with something real.
but Blood Mountain had
Becca
somehow
Walsh had
eluded
been my
me.
rock throughout
The
the
tourism
divorce
website
proceedings.
proclaimed it as
Her
the
unfailing
highest peak
optimism
on the
a
Georgia
counterbalance
section of
to
the
my
growing
growing
trail.
cynicism, with
Trust me,
breathtaking
she'd
autumn
said over
vistas.
coffee at our favorite Atlanta cafe.
What they failed to mention
4
were the
days in
legends
the mountains
attached to
with
the
no
place.
cell service,
Legends
no
I would soon
email,
learn carried
and
more
no
truth
reminders
than
of
fiction.
your old life.
The
is
drive
exactly
from Atlanta
what you
took
need.
about 2 hours.
Her
The
eyes
cityscape
sparkled
gradually
with
giving way
excitement
to
as she
rolling
laid out
foothills and
topographic
eventually the
maps of the
majestic
Cohuta
Blue Ridge
Wilderness
Mountains
on the
table between us.
I stopped at the
Besides,
mountain crossings
the fall
outfitter
colors
at
will be
Neal's Gap
perfect
to
for
pick
your
up a
photography.
detailed trail map and chat
Photography
with the staff.
had always been my
The bearded
refuge.
clerk eyed
the one
Max,
hobby
who
that
sat
stayed with me
obediently
through
at
the
my
years.
feet.
Then
Before
looked
my
back at me
marriage
with
fell
what I now
apart,
recognize
I'd even
as
harbored
concern.
dreams of doing it professionally.
Solo hiking? He
Now,
asked as he
it was
rang
just
up my
another
map and the
abandoned
extra batteries
ambition.
I'd grabbed.
I don't know.
Just me and my best guy, I
Becca,
replied, patting Max's head.
hesitated.
I'm
The
not
dog's
exactly
tail
in
thumped
peak
against the
hiking
wooden
condition.
floor. The
You'll
clerk
be fine.
hesitated. It's challenging,
You camping
but
up
not
at the shelter?
impossible. Plus,
Planning to set up
she
around
added with
Lake
a mischievous
Winfield Scott
smile,
for the first night.
Tyler's coming
and hike
too.
up to the summit tomorrow.
Tyler Donovan was
Why?
Becca's new boyfriend
Something I
of
should
3
know?
months.
I'd
He
only
shrugged,
met him
but
twice,
there was
but there was something
gesture.
about him that put me on
Just,
edge. He was
stay on the marked
undeniably
trails.
handsome.
We've had a
Tall,
few
with
folks
dark
get turned
features
around
and an easy
lately.
smile.
Cell service
but
is
there was an
spotty,
intensity
and
to
there's a
him
blood
that
moon
seemed at
coming
odds
this
with
weekend.
Becca's
I
free-spirited
smiled.
nature.
I've got a GPS.
When he looked at you,
extra
it felt like
batteries,
he was searching for
and I've
something
hiked plenty
hidden
of remote
beneath your
areas
skin.
before.
And
Right.
you can bring
He
Marcus.
handed me my change.
Becca added, knowing
Well,
my German
good luck
shepherd
out
was
there,
my
ma'am.
weakness.
Keep that
He'll
dog
love it
close.
out there. I should have pressed him for
Marcus
details.
had been my salvation.
Instead,
after the
I thanked
divorce.
him and headed back
When
to my
everything
car,
else in my life
eager
seemed
to
to
hit
be
the trail
crumbling.
before noon.
His unwavering loyalty remained
The parking
constant.
area for the Lake Winfield
The thought
Scott
of watching
recreation
him
area
bound
was
through
nearly
mountain
empty,
streams and
which
forests
wasn't
sealed
surprising
the
for
deal.
Thursday in
Maybe
mid-October.
Becca was right.
The
Maybe
campground
this was
itself
exactly
was
what I
officially
needed.
closed for the season.
Fine,
but
I
the trails
conceded.
remained open.
But I'm bringing bear spray
I pulled
and
into
a
a
satellite
spot near the
phone.
trailhead.
Becca laughed.
Double-checked my pack.
Always the prepared
clipped
one.
Max's
It's
leash
just
to
the
his
Kahuna
harness
wilderness,
and
not
locked
the
the
Amazon.
car.
The
If
air
only
was
I'd
crisp,
known then what
carrying
waited
the
for us in those
unmistakable
ancient
scent of
mountains.
autumn.
If only I'd
Decaying
listened to my
leaves,
instincts
damp
about Tyler,
earth,
and
if only
pine,
we'd stayed on the marked
forest
trails.
canopy blazed
But
with
regrets
reds,
do nothing to
oranges,
change
and
the
golds.
past, and
I
the past
breathed
is now
deeply,
permanently
already feeling
etched
the weight
into
of
my
the past
nightmares.
months lifting from my shoulders.
The drive from
This
Atlanta
was
to the
what I
Kahuna
needed.
Wilderness Trailhead
Space,
took about 2
silence,
hours. We left
simplicity.
early on a Thursday morning.
The trail
The weather
started
report
gently
promising
enough,
clear
winding
skies
through
and
dense
moderate
forest
temperatures,
alongside a
perfect for
bubbling
hiking.
creek.
Max trotted
Tyler
ahead,
drove
his
nose
oversized
working
Jeep
overtime,
Wrangler,
occasionally
our
looking
backpacks
back
and
as
gear
if to make
loaded
sure
in
I
the
was
rear.
keeping up.
Marcus
I stopped
sat
frequently
beside me
to
in the back
photograph
seat,
interesting
his
fungi,
head occasionally resting on
unusual
my
rock
lap as he
formations,
watched the
or
world
particularly
transition
striking
from
foliage.
suburban sprawl to
By
rolling
late
farmland,
afternoon,
we'd
and
made
finally
good
to the
progress
dense
and found a
forests
small
of North
clearing about a
Georgia.
quarter-mile from the lake.
Becca controlled
Perfect
the
for
playlist
setting
from
up
the
camp.
passenger seat,
Filling
as
the
I was
car
pitching
with
my tent.
upbeat indie
I heard
rock
voices
that matched
approaching
her
along the
mood.
trail.
She and
A moment later, a family emerged from the
made me feel
woods.
like a third wheel.
A tall, athletic
Despite the
man
planning
in his
of this
early
trip
40s,
being ostensibly
a woman
for
with a
my
sensible
benefit.
bob haircut, and
I
two
distracted
children.
myself by
A
taking
girl
photos
about
through the
12
window
and
as
a
the
younger
landscape
boy.
grew increasingly
The man
wild
noticed
and
me
beautiful.
and raised a hand in greeting.
Eliza,
"Hello
Tyler
there,"
said,
catching my
mind
eyes
if we
in the
set up
rearview
nearby?
mirror.
Becca
The kids
tells
are
me you've
pretty
never
worn
been to
out.
Kahuna before?
Not at all.
No,
I replied,
I
gesturing
admitted.
to the ample
Most
space
of my
in the
hiking has
clearing.
been in state
Plenty
parks.
of room.
Nothing this remote.
While they unloaded their
You're in
packs,
for a
the
treat,
man introduced
he said
himself
with an
as
enthusiasm
James
that
Winslow.
seemed genuine.
His wife is Sarah.
The Kahuna
daughter
Wilderness
Emma,
is one of the
and
most
son
pristine
as
ecosystems
Liam.
in the eastern
They were
United
from
States.
Marietta,
Taking
over
advantage of the kids'
90,000
fall
acres
break
of
for a camping
protected
trip.
forest.
They
Some
spend
of
too
the
much
trees
time on
there
screens,
predate
Sarah
European
explained, helping
colonization.
Emma untangle tent poles.
Tyler's a bit
We
of a
figured
nature
a few days
encyclopedia.
without Wi-Fi
Becca
would do
said,
them good.
giving his shoulder an
Liam
affectionate
approached
squeeze.
cautiously.
He's
eyeing
hiked
Max.
practically every trail
Can
in
I
Georgia.
pet your dog, lady?
Not every
His
trail.
name is Max.
Tyler
Yes,
corrected her.
You can, but most of the
He's
ones
very
worth hiking.
friendly, I said,
I've been wanting to
keeping a
explore
close
some
eye
of
as
the
the boy
more
reached out.
off the beaten path
Max,
areas
ever
of
the
Kahuna
gentleman,
for years.
sat patiently as
Something
Liam
in his
stroked his
tone
fur
made me
with
sit up
tentative
straighter.
fingers.
I thought we were
saw
sticking to
another
established
hiker
trails.
back about a mile.
Grassy Mountain
James
and Jack's
mentioned
River,
as he
right?
hammered tent stakes into
That's
the
the official
ground.
plan, Tyler said
Guy
with a
looked
smile
like he was
that
carrying
didn't
enough
quite
gear
reach
for
his
a month
eyes.
in the woods.
But sometimes the most
As if
remarkable
summoned by
discoveries
the
happen when
description.
you venture a little
A man
off
in his
course.
late 30s
appeared on the
Becca
trail.
laughed.
He was
Don't
tall
worry,
and
Eliza.
lean, with a
We
short
won't let you
beard
get
and
lost.
observant eyes that immediately
Tyler's
swept the
eyes
clearing,
stayed on mine
taking
in the
in
mirror
every
a beat
detail
too long
before
approached.
returning to the road. Afternoon,
No,
he called.
he said softly.
Getting pretty late to find a
Getting
spot.
lost
Mind
isn't
if I
the
join the
concern.
neighborhood?
There
We
was
reached
something
the
I
trailhead
couldn't
parking
quite
area
place
just
about him.
before noon.
Attention
The
in
lot
his
was
movements
nearly
that
empty
contradicted
except for
her
two other
easy
vehicles.
smile.
A
But
dusty
after
pickup
brief
truck and a
introductions,
compact
his
SUV,
name was Thomas
testament
Harper.
to the
He
wilderness
set up his
area's
tent
remoteness.
efficiently
at the edge of the clearing, and
As
as
we
we
unloaded
unloaded
our
our
gear,
gear, occasionally
noticed
writing
Tyler
in a small
examining
notebook.
a crudely
made wooden sign
As
nailed
dusk
to a
approached,
tree at the
we
edge of the
each
forest.
prepared
our dinners. I walked over to
The
join
Winslows
him.
had a small
Marcus
cook
trotting at
stove
my
where they
heels.
heated
The
canned
sign was
stew.
weathered.
The
Thomas
wood
ate
split
some
in
kind
places,
of freeze-dried
but the message
meal.
carved into its
I
surface
fed
was
Max's
still
kibble
legible.
before heating water for my
Respect
own
the
dehydrated
forest,
pasta
or pay the price.
The normality of the scene
Friendly
was
welcome,
comforting.
I commented.
Strangers sharing
Tyler
space
ran
and the
his
rituals
fingers
of
over the
outdoor
jagged
living.
lettering.
So,
Local
what brings you out here
superstition.
alone?
Thomas
These mountains
asked me
have
as we
their
all
share
sat
of
around
legends.
the Winslow's lantern after
What
dinner.
kind of legends?
The night had
I
grown
asked,
cold quickly,
feeling a slight
our breath
chill
visible
despite
in the
the
glow
warm
of the light.
autumn sun.
Before
Tyler could
photographer,
answer,
I said,
Becca
keeping
called
it
us over to
simple.
help with the final equipment
Wildlife,
check.
landscapes,
We each carried our own
and
I needed
packs
some
with
time
personal
away from
gear,
the city,
while
Tyler had volunteered to carry
Divorced,
most of the
he
shared
asked,
supplies,
his directness
including the tent
cooking equipment before I could answer. Sarah interjected. As experienced hikers, both he and Becca made quick work of adjusting straps and redistributing weight for I noticed she's wearing a hiking ring on her right hand. Clumsy by comparison, moved it over from the left. Still getting used to the new hiking boots I purchased for the trip. I instinctively touched the simple with his own doggy backpack. He was carrying his food and collapsible water bowl. Skills seemed the most eager of all of us to hit the trail. I deflected.
He stood alert at the trailhead,
Blood Mountain, looking back at me with impatient eyes.
flickered across his face.
At least
Someone's excited,
perhaps, I said, before
scratching
he replied.
behind his ears.
Research.
You will be
I'm writing
too,
an article
once
on
we get
Appalachian
going,
folklore.
Becca assured
This
me.
area has some
First day is
interesting
mostly
stories.
uphill to our campsite.
Like what?
But the
Emma
views are
asked,
worth
leaning
it.
forward eagerly.
Tyler locked the Jeep
Sarah
and
shot her
pocketed the
husband a
keys.
warning look, but
Everyone
James
ready?
just smiled.
With
It's
nods
okay.
of confirmation,
She's
we
read
adjusted our
scarier
packs
things
in
in
those
those books
final
she keeps
time
checking
and
out from
stepped
the
onto the
library.
trail. The
Thomas
path
seemed
seemed
to
to
consider
consider
his
his
words
words well
carefully.
maintained, gradually
Well,
narrowing as it wound
Blood
its way
Mountain
deeper
got
into
its
the
name
forest.
from a battle between the Cherokee
Towering
and Creek
oaks,
tribes long
maples,
ago.
and hickories created
So
a
much
vibrant
blood was
canopy
spilled
overhead.
that it stained the
Their
ground
leaves
red.
a spectacular
That's
mosaic
the
of
sanitized
red,
version.
orange,
He continued.
and gold.
His voice
I
dropping
couldn't help
slightly.
but pause every few
There
minutes to
are
take
older
photos,
stories,
trying to capture
the
the way
Cherokee
the
called
sunlight
this
filtered
place
through the
Kauai.
leaves.
This
Place
is
incredible.
But local settlers had other names
patiently
for me to
They
finish
claimed
the
the
mountain demanded blood
Told you,
sacrifices,
she said,
especially
her smile
during certain
widened
beneath the
moons.
brim of her hiking
That's
hat.
horrible,
And it gets
Sarah
better
said, pulling
the
Liam
deeper we
closer
go.
to her side. We
Just
hiked
stories,
steadily for the
Thomas
next 3
assured her,
hours, but I caught
the trail
something
gradually
in his tone,
increasing in difficulty
the careful
as we gained
neutrality of
elevation.
someone not saying everything
Despite
they
my
know.
initial concerns,
Well,
I kept
on
pace
that cheerful
reasonably
note,
well.
James announced,
Though my
standing
calves
up,
burned
I
with
think
the
it's time
effort.
we got the kids to bed.
Marcus
Long
stayed
hike
either just
tomorrow,
ahead of me or at my
as
side.
the Winslows retreated to their tent.
Occasionally darting
I
off
found
to
myself
investigate
alone
an interesting
with
scent
Thomas.
before returning to
Max
the group.
had settled at my feet.
Tyler
but I
led
noticed
our
he
small
kept his eyes
procession
on
with
Thomas,
confidence,
more alert
occasionally
than usual.
pointing out interesting
You
flora
scared
or
them,
signs of
I said.
wildlife. Sometimes
His knowledge
fear
was
is
impressive,
appropriate,
and I found myself
replied, his
warming to
gaze
him
moving
as the
to
day
the darkness
progressed.
beyond our small
Maybe I'd
circle of
misjudged
light.
him after all.
These mountains
Around
keep
mid-afternoon,
secrets.
we
You
stopped
shouldn't
by
be
a
up
small
here
stream
alone
to rest and refill our
I'm
water
not alone.
bottles. I have
Max,
As Tyler prepared
I
the
said,
filtration
my
system,
hackles rising
Becca
at his
sat
presumption,
beside me on a flat
and
rock,
I've been hiking and
bumping
camping
my shoulder
solo for
playfully.
years. Not
Admit
here,
it, not
she said.
now. This is
He
exactly
looked up
what
at the
you
sky,
needed.
where clouds
I
obscured
nodded,
the stars,
taking in the peaceful
blood
sounds of
moons
rushing
coming.
water and birdsong.
3 days away.
You might be right.
You don't
It's
seriously
beautiful out
believe.
here. Belief
See?
has nothing to do with
Sometimes you
it.
just need to trust
He
me.
cut me off.
His
Becca
voice
reached out to
hard.
pet Marcus, who had flopped
3
down
hikers
at our
have
feet.
gone missing in this area
Even
in the
your
past year.
overprotective fur
All
baby
around
is
the time of
relaxed.
seasonal full moons.
As if to
2
contradict her,
were never found.
Marcus suddenly lifted his
third,
head, ears
he
perked
hesitated.
forward. A low growl
Let's just say what they
rumbled in
did
his
find
chest as he
didn't look
stared
human
into the dense
anymore.
underbrush across the
A
stream.
chill ran down
What
my
is it,
spine
boy?
that had nothing
I
to
asked,
do with the
instantly
October
alert.
air.
Marcus
Why are
was
you
well
really
trained
here?
and
I
not
asked.
prone to random aggression.
Thomas stared into
Tyler
the darkness
looked up
for a
from
long
the water
moment
filter.
before answering.
Probably just a
My
deer
sister
or maybe a
disappeared on
black
this
bear.
mountain last November.
Nothing to worry about as
The
long
police
as we make
called off
noise
the search
and keep
after
our
2
distance.
weeks.
Said
But
she
Marcus
probably fell
continued
into
to
a ravine.
growl.
Died
The
of
fur
exposure.
along his spine
But
standing
Melissa
on
was
end.
an experienced
Maybe
hiker.
we should move on.
She wouldn't have
I
made rookie
suggested,
mistakes.
suddenly
uncomfortable.
I'm sorry,
Tyler
I said,
nodded,
and meant it.
efficiently
He
packing up
nodded,
the filtration
then stood.
system.
We're only about an hour
Keep
from
your
our
eyes
planned
open.
campsite anyway.
And that dog close.
Best to keep going.
He glanced at
As we
Max, who
prepared
was
to
now
leave,
standing.
I
His
noticed
attention
Tyler
fixed on
scanning
something
the
in
forest
the dark
across the
woods.
stream with unusual intensity.
Animals sense things
When he
caught me
can't.
watching him. He quickly
With that
smiled and
cryptic
adjusted
warning,
his pack.
Thomas retreated
Ready?
to his tent.
He asked,
leaving
his
me
voice
alone
casual
with
but
Max, who
strained.
continued to stare
I nodded
intently
and
into
called
the forest.
Marcus to my side,
a low growl
flipping his leash
building
onto
in
his
his
harness
throat.
for the first time since we'd
What
started
is it,
hiking.
boy?
I whispered,
Whatever had
straining
triggered
to
his
see what had
reaction,
caught
I
his
wanted to
attention.
keep him close.
The darkness
As
between
we
the
resumed
trees
our
seemed
hike,
absolute.
I couldn't shake the feeling
impenetrable.
that something was watching
But then,
us from the
just
trees.
for a moment, I thought
Several
I saw
times I
movement,
turned
a
quickly,
deeper shadow,
convinced
shifting
I would
against
catch
sight
sight
of whatever it was.
Max's
But each time I saw
growl
nothing but the
intensified.
endless forest.
Come on.
Even
I
as
said,
we put
suddenly
distance
eager
between
for the
ourselves and
illusory
the safety
safety
of nylon
Marcus
walls,
remained tense.
I guided him
Repeatedly
into our
looking
tent
back
and
the
zipped
way
the
we
door
had
shut.
come.
Irrationally
The
relieved,
trail
to have even
grew
that
steeper
flimsy
and
barrier
narrower
between
as
us
we
and
approached
whatever
the grassy
lurked
mountain.
outside. Conversation
Sleep
dwindled
came
as we
fitfully
each
that
focused
night.
on
I
navigating
dreamed of
the
running
increasingly
through
endless
difficult
woods,
terrain.
pursuing
The forest
being
around us
pursued,
seemed to
I couldn't
change
tell
subtly
which.
too.
The trees
whispered
whispered
names
names
that
that weren't
together.
mine, their
And
trunks
somewhere
twisted
ahead,
into
a
unusual
light
shapes.
pulsed with the rhythm of a
The
heartbeat.
vibrant fall colors
I woke
gave way
several
to
times
muted
to
browns
Max's
and
alert
and
posture,
sickly yellows.
his ears pricked toward
Even the
sounds
quality
I
of
couldn't
light
hear.
seemed different.
When morning
Dimmer
finally
somehow,
came, though the
I
sky
emerged
remained
from my
clear
tent to
above
find
the Thomas
canopy.
already up.
Is it
Boiling
just
water
me,
on a small
or does
stove.
it feel like we've
He
crossed
nodded
into
in
a different
greeting, but
forest?
said nothing. I asked
The
Becca
shadows
during a
under
brief
his water
water
break.
suggesting his night
She
had
looked
been
around,
no more restful than
considering.
mine. The
The
ecology
Winslow's were still in
does
their tent,
change
though
with
I could hear
elevation.
movement inside.
Different species
I checked
thrive
my
at
phone.
different heights.
No signal, as expected.
It's more than that.
Then pulled out my
Tyler
GPS to
interjected.
mark our location.
This section
and
of the
plan day's
wilderness
route.
has always been.
I frowned at the screen.
Different.
The locals
That's
have
not
names
right.
for it.
I muttered, tapping
What kind
the
of
device.
names?
Thomas
asked.
looked up. Tyler shouldered his pack before answering. GPS says we're about 2 miles northeast of where we should be. Grandmother's garden. I'd hiked in from the southwest yesterday. Grandmother following the clearly marked Tyler trail. Explained as we resumed the walking. Unit had been working perfectly. Local legend about an old woman who lived deep in these mountains. He studied the screen, then pulled out something else entirely. His devices showed the same lure hikers off the main paths, collecting them like specimens in her garden. Interesting isn't the word I'd use, I said, pulling Marcus closer to my side as he let out another low growl. Within a few meters. Tyler shrugged. Before we could discuss it further, wilderness areas have their local bogeyman from their tent. Keeps people from wandering immediately too far ran to Max, who suffered the child's enthusiastic fading as we tackled the final ascent to our planned campsite. James called. By the time we reached the relatively flat sleep clearing, okay? The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, not wanting to mention my disturbing shadows or the GPS anomaly. Despite my exhaustion, I had to admit the view was spectacular. As we shared a simple breakfast, rolling mountains I noticed stretching into the distance, their slopes ablaze with oatmeal without enthusiasm. We worked together to set up camp. Everything okay, Tyler and Becca assembling the large tent while I gathered kindling for a fire. Marcus, I heard someone walking around our tent last night, still alert and watchful. Sarah frowned. He's really on edge. You were dreaming, Becca noted as she helped me arrange stones for a fire ring. I wasn't dreaming. Does he usually get like this outdoors? They kept saying, come out, come out, admitted. He loves hiking. Uncomfortable silence I've never seen him this tense. I saw Thomas watching the girl keener senses than we do. Tyler probably said, just joining us with an armful of larger branches. Too brightly. Maybe there's all kinds of weird sounds in the trees. A coyote. It wasn't the bobcat, Emma muttered. As darkness fell, we got the fire started. We prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated camping meals. The Winslows planned to head to the summit and back in one day. The flames cast dancing shadows across our faces as continuing north along the Appalachian Trail. More relaxed. I had originally intended to climb to the summit as well. Inexplicable unease had taken root made me hesitate. I think I'll explore around the lake today, I told them. The flames occasionally flickering with greenish blue hues. I want to make sure I can navigate properly before going farther. So, Tyler, smart, I said, trying to distract myself, and I caught the approval in his voice. How did you get so knowledgeable about this area? Hard to get lost if you stay on the fire with a stick. In the end, we all decided to hike together to the lake, then separate according to our plans. From these parts. The morning was clear when I was a kid. Perfect hiking weather. Stories. Max trotted ahead, grandmother occasionally disappearing around bends in the trail, nodded, only to reappear moments later, firelight, checking on me and others. The Winslow children have been disappearing in these mountains for generations, running ahead with written written as accidents or exposure or animal attacks. We've been hiking about 40 minutes when the trail opened up to reveal Lake Winfield. Believe those stories? Its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding autumn foliage shivers his words sent down my spine. It was breathtaking. I believe there are things in these woods that can't be easily explained. It's beautiful, Sarah said. My grandfather saw something to stand beside me as I framed something that haunted him until the day he died. Worth the hike just for this. What did he see? We continued around the eastern shore of the lake where the trail split. Tyler stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. The other continued around the lake. The Weaver. This said it wore the shape of an old woman but wasn't human. Sure, you don't want to join us for the summit for a very long time. The views are supposed to be spectacular. When they came across what looked like a body wrapped in vines and branches. But Max was acting strangely again, staring into the woods with his hackles raised. They realized the person was still alive inside. I think I'll stick with my plan. Wide and aware. Maybe tomorrow, after I figure out what's wrong with my GPS. We exchanged good wishes and muttered, instinctively moving closer to text when we all had service again. They tried to free the person. As the Winslows and Thomas started up the summit trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might not see some of them described exactly what he saw. Max and I spent the morning circumnavigating the lake, running, stopping. He was the only one who made it back to town. The tranquility of the place worked its magic. And I began to dismiss my earlier apprehensions as nothing more than lingering stress from the divorce with a sharp snap with Thomas's ominous stories. Well, around noon, finally said, we took a break on a rocky outcrop overlooking the water. Remind me never to ask you to tell a campfire story again with Max. Tyler smiled, checked my GPS again. His eyes remained serious. It now showed us in a completely different location. Those old legends get 5 miles from our actual position. Maybe we should turn in, replacing the batteries. Suddenly eager to be inside the relative safety clouds had begun moving in from the west. We've got a lot of ground to cover tomorrow. The forecast had mentioned a chance of afternoon showers, But these
performing our
clouds
nighttime
looked more
routines
serious,
with headlamps
the
illuminating
harbingers
the
of a
darkness
genuine
around
storm.
us.
Inside the
I
tent,
decided
we
to
arranged
head
our
back
sleeping
to our
bags
original
in a campsite to set up
Becca
before the
in the
rain
middle,
hit.
with Tyler
We were
and me
about
on
halfway
either
back
side.
when the first rumble
Marcus
of thunder
curled up
echoed
at my
across
feet,
the lake.
his body still
Max
tense,
whined,
ears
pressing against
twitching
my
at
leg.
every sound from the
temperature
forest.
seemed to drop several degrees
I lay
in
awake
moments,
long
and
after
the forest's
Becca's
breathing
breathing
had
had
settled
settled
into
as
the
the
storm
storm
cloud
sleep,
swallowed the sun.
staring at the tent ceiling and
"It's okay,
listening to the
boy,"
wilderness
I reassured
outside.
him, picking up the
wind
pace.
through the
"We'll be
trees
fine."
sounded almost like
The rain
whispers,
started as a light
patterns of
patter
speech
against the
just
leaves
beyond
overhead,
comprehension,
but quickly intensified
beside
until
me,
it was pouring
Tyler
through the
shifted in
canopy
his
and
sleeping
sheets.
bag. Within minutes,
"Can't
I was
sleep,"
soaked,
he
despite
whispered.
my rain jacket.
"Too many ghost stories
trail,
before
now
bed,"
slick with mud,
I replied quietly.
became treacherous.
Sorry
Max
about
stayed
that.
close, as
I
miserable
sometimes
as I
forget how
was.
these stories sound
Lightning
to people who didn't
flashed,
grow up with them.
followed almost immediately
Is
by
that
a
really
deafening
why you
crack
want to
of
come
thunder.
to Cahuta? I
Too
asked.
close, because of your
We needed
grandfather's
shelter,
stories, and soon. There was a pause
I
before he
remembered
answered.
passing a small cabin earlier,
Partly.
set back
There are
from the
places
lake
out here
100
he told
yards
me
or so.
about.
Places
It had
I've
looked
always wanted to
abandoned.
find, but at this point,
What
any
places?
roof would do.
Turning
Tyler
off the
propped
main
himself
trail,
up on one elbow.
I tried to
his
retrace
face
our
dimly
steps
visible
toward
in the
where I thought
ambient
the
moonlight
cabin
had
filtering
been.
through the tent
The
fabric.
rain made it difficult
There's
to see
supposed to be
far
a
ahead,
cabin deep in
and
the
the
wilderness,
increasingly muddy path
not
was
on any
hard
map.
to follow.
Built by the woman
After
the
what
locals
seemed
called
like an
grandmother
eternity of
Wicker,
slogging through the downpour,
grandfather said if you
I was
found
about
it,
to give
you'd
up
find
when Max
answers about what really
perked up
lives
and
in
darted
these mountains.
forward.
Max,
"And you want to
wait,"
find this
I called,
cabin?"
hurrying after him.
"Why?"
He stopped at the edge
"Wouldn't
of a
you
small
want to
clearing,
know if the
and
stories
there
were
it
true?"
was.
he
The
asked.
cabin I'd glimpsed
His voice
earlier.
suddenly
Up
intense.
close, it looked simultaneously
you
more
want to see for
dilapidated and
yourself?
more recently used
Before
than
I
I'd
could
thought.
answer, Marcus
The
let
log
out a low
structure was
whine
weathered,
and pressed
with moss
closer to
growing
my
on the
legs.
north-facing wall. Outside,
But
something
smoke
rustled in the
rose from the
underbrush
stone
near our
chimney.
tent.
I
We both
hesitated,
fell silent.
trespassing
Listening.
on someone's property
The
wasn't
sound
part
moved
of my
around
plan,
the perimeter of our
but the
campsite,
storm was only
circling
intensifying.
slowly before fading into
Another
the distance.
lightning strike, close enough
Just
to make
an
the hair on
animal,
my arm
Tyler
stand
whispered,
up, though
made
he
the
didn't
decision
sound
for me.
convinced. I approached
Right,
the cabin and knocked
I
on the rough
agreed,
wooden
equally
door.
unconvinced.
No answer.
We should
I
try to
knocked
sleep.
again, louder.
Tyler settled
"Hello?
back into his sleeping
Is anyone
bag.
home? I'm
Good
caught
night,
in the
Eliza.
storm and need shelter."
Good night, I murmured.
After
stroking
another moment
Marcus's
of
fur to
silence,
calm
I
both
tested
him
the
and
door.
myself.
It
It
swung
was a
open
long
with a creak
time
that
before
seemed
sleep
straight out of a
finally
horror
claimed
movie.
me. And when
Max
it did,
growled
I dreamed
softly,
of twisted trees
his body
with faces
tense.
pressed into their bark.
"It's okay,"
Screaming
I whispered,
silently
though I
as
wasn't
roots
sure
and
if I was
vines
reassuring
slowly
him or
consumed
myself.
them. "Hello?"
I woke
I
to
called
the
again as we
disorienting
stepped
awareness that
inside.
something was wrong.
The cabin's interior
The quality
was
of
dim,
light
but
inside the tent
surprisingly
suggested
cozy.
early morning.
A fire
But my
burned
watch
low in the
read
hearth,
10:17
casting dancing
a.m.
shadows across
Far
the
later
single
than
room.
we'd planned to start our
Simple
day.
furniture,
A
beside
table
me,
with 2 chairs,
Becca's
a
sleeping
narrow
bag
bed
was
in the
empty.
corner,
A rocking
Becca,
chair near the fire.
I called, sitting
Filled
up
the
quickly,
space without crowding
Tyler
it.
stirred and opened
Bundles
his
of
eyes.
dried herbs
"What
hung
time
from
is
the
it?"
rafters,
After
filling
10,
the air with an
according to my
aromatic
watch.
mixture of rosemary,
Where's Becca?
thyme, and
He checked
something
his own
else I
watch,
couldn't identify.
frowning.
That can't be right.
"Well, don't
Mine
just
says
stand there
7:30
dripping
on my floor, dear."
We emerged
Come
from the
in
tent to
properly
find
and
the
shut the
campsite
door.
bathed in the strange
I
filtered
nearly
light of
jumped
early
out of my
dawn.
skin. Not the bright
A woman
sunshine of
had
mid-morning.
appeared silently from
What
Marcus
I now
stood
realized
alert at
was
the
a
edge
small
of the
pantry
clearing,
alcove,
staring
She
intently
was perhaps
into
in
the
her
forest.
60s, with
"Becca,"
silver-streaked
I
black
called
hair
again,
pulled
louder
into a
this
bun
time.
and penetrating dark
"Over here."
eyes that seemed to look
Her
straight
voice
through
came
me.
from beyond a stand
Despite
of
her
trees at the
age, she
perimeter
moved
of our
with
campsite.
fluid grace as she
Relief
approached, flooded through me.
"I'm sorry,"
Followed immediately
I
by
stammered.
irritation.
"I didn't mean to intrude."
She shouldn't have
The
wandered
storm-
off alone. No need
I
to
muttered
explain.
as
Tyler and
she
I
cut
made
me
our way
off,
toward her voice,
gesturing
toward the fire.
We found Becca kneeling
Nature
beside a
has
small
her moods.
stagnant pool of water
Go on,
just beyond
warm
the tree
yourself.
line.
Your
The
dog,
pool
too,
was
though he doesn't
unnaturally
seem to
still.
like my home much.
Its surface reflecting the canopy
Indeed,
above,
Max
with
remained near the
mirror-like
door,
perfection.
his posture rigid.
Surrounding it was a circle
Eyes
of
fixed on the
mushrooms.
woman, their pale caps
"Max,
gleaming in the
it's
dim
okay,"
light. I said, patting
"Look
my
what I
leg.
found."
Reluctantly,
Becca said,
he came to
her
my
voice
side,
oddly
but kept his
flat.
attention on our hostess.
"Isn't it beautiful?
Smart animal. Something
She
about
remarked.
her posture seemed
They sense
wrong.
things, don't they?
Too rigid.
I'm
Her
Eleanor
movements
Blackwood, by the
mechanical
way,
as she dipped
and
her
you would
fingers
be?
into the dark water.
Eliza Crawford.
"Becca, thank
Don't
you for
touch
letting
that."
us in," Tyler said sharply.
"Not at all.
We don't know
I don't
what's
get
in
many
there."
visitors, especially
She
this time
withdrew
drew her hand slowly. She moved water
to the fire,
dripping from her
adding a log
fingertips.
with practiced
When she
ease.
turned to face us, her
You're
expression
soaked
was
through.
serene. Let me
Almost
find you
vacant.
something dry to wear
It's
while your
just
clothes
water,
dry by
she
the
said
fire.
with
With
a
a smile that didn't reach
Before
her
I could
eyes,
protest,
she
pure
disappeared
water.
into the
She
pantry
told me
again
so.
and returned with a simple
cold
linen
weight
dress.
settled
in my stomach. This should fit.
Who told you?
Change behind that screen.
Becca
blinked, confusion briefly
pointed to a
clouding her
folding
features.
wooden
screen in the corner
What?
that I hadn't noticed before. I'll make us some tea. I was collecting water for breakfast. The dress did fit. Almost she held up her empty water bottle as if given our different builds. She'd made no attempt. Eleanor was willowy and tall. Plenty of water. While I'm more average in height and extending his hand. But the warm, dry fabric was welcome against my skin. So I didn't question. Stared at his hand for a moment when I emerged, before taking my wet clothes, allowing him to help her to her feet. Fire. And Eleanor was pouring amber liquid from a cast iron kettle into the knees of her hiking wear mugs and smeared across her palms. Herb tea, she explained, she'd handing me a mug, in the muck around the my pool. Own blend, but the ground where warming the blood was settlingly dry. Back at the camp, smelled strongly of breakfast and instant oatmeal and coffee. Sweet, but with a bitter undertone. Seemed to return to her usual self as we ate, sip, laughing and chatting about the day's planned hike, warming me from the inside out. If not for the mud still clinging to her clothes from around the strange encounter by the pool, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined her odd behavior, I replied. As we hiked up for a few days, I pulled Tyler aside. I met a family on the trail, the Winslows, did that seem weird and to another hiker named Becca by the pool. Something flickered his expression eyes at the mention of Thomas. Very weird. But her expression remained pleasant. Did you notice how our watches showed at different times? Yes. I believe I've seen that young man before, I suggested. Keeps to himself. I doesn't believe it. The family. Both they have watches at once? Yes. Tyler shook his head. Emma, look at this. Liam. He pulled out his GPS device, showing me the screen. Children loved these where woods. There should have been a clear map of our location. Forgotten how to see. The display showed only distorted lines and fragmented me over the rim of her mug. Been like this since I woke up. What brings you to Blood Mountain? Can't get a satellite fix either. Most hikers navigating summer months. Map and compass. I explained about my photography. That's the plan. Leaving out the part about the divorce. Then added, but I think we should consider heading back to the trailhead instead of continuing with this strange, intense woman. I glanced at Becca, who was cheerfully packing her sleeping bag, looking completely normal. The mountain has much to show those with eyes to see. Weird morning, but you should be careful. Because when things start going wrong there where the veil grows thin, they tend to cascade. Especially now, Tyler said, with the blood GPS failure, time discrepancies, my conversation Becca with Thomas wandering off, flooding back. I don't like the pattern. You believe those stories? I was surprised to find myself reluctant to turn back. Didn't reach her eyes. Despite the strange occurrences, nothing to do with truth because of them. I felt mountains were old when the first humans walked between their trees. Let's at least stick to today's plan. They have their own rules. If anything else happens, we can reassess. A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth, then nodded. Max whined softly, but we stayed against my leg. No exceptions. I should go, I said, with suddenly dismantled and our packs readjusted. Seems to be letting we set off on the trail that would take us deeper. The drumming on the roof had lessened to a gentle According to our original plan, Eleanor made no move to return my clothes, which we still spend 2 nights before looping back to the trailhead. The storm will pick up again without soon. Reliable GPS. Besides, it's nearly dusk. Relied on his topographic map no place to be wandering after dark. The trail was descended from grassy mountain through increasingly dense forest. I insist. Unlike the previous days, vibrant autumn landscape, the storm drove them back from the surroundings were muted and oppressive. To punctuate her words, the trees grew closer together, in the distance, their trunks often twisted into unnatural shapes. Again. Several times myself reluctantly agreeing to stay, deliberately constructed, continuing unease, branches woven together to form basket-like surprisingly gracious hostess, or standing like she prepared a simple but delicious stew for dinner. Are those man-made? Served with crusty bread that she claimed particularly elaborate weaving. He shook his head slowly. She asked questions. I've never seen anything like this before. My family. Becca, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since children planned to, suddenly stepped off the trail toward one of the woven structures, feeling a pang at the thought of the family I'd once hoped to build with Andrew, reaching out to touch the intricate pattern completely outside, making the cabin's windows into black mirrors. Tyler began. Eleanor told stories of the mountain, her palm against legends that sounded similar to what Thomas had mentioned. Nothing happened, but with subtle differences. Then, so subtly, I thought I might be imagining the mountain wasn't simply a place of bloodshed beneath her touch, but a sentient entity that required her payment for safe passage. Becca didn't appear to notice the old families knew this. One of peaceful fascination shadowed in the firelight. We should keep moving. They left offerings at certain places. Keep my voice steady. Crossroads. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Stone circles. Becca withdrew her hand reluctantly and rejoined us on the trail. Small tokens of respect. We continued our hike. But the new people, Marcus stayed unusually close to through hikers, giving Becca a wide berth without giving back. And his behavior so the mountain takes heightened my unease. By midday, it became clear that we had strayed from our intended path. Drinking steadily. The trail we followed grew increasingly faint until it disappeared altogether, seemed sharper leaving us to push through dense underbrush. Whatever it needs, Eliza. Tyler
it hungers
consulted his
for.
map repeatedly. I was saved from
frustration
having to respond
evident.
by pounding at
This
the door.
doesn't make
sense. Max
he
immediately
muttered.
leapt to his feet,
According to the
barking
map,
furiously.
we should have reached
Jack's
Eleanor
River
by
seemed
now, but the terrain
unsurprised by
doesn't
the
match
interruption.
at all.
More
Could we have
lost
taken a
souls,
wrong turn?
she murmured,
I asked,
rising gracefully to
Maybe,
answer the door.
but
he trailed
the
off,
Winslow
scanning
family
our
stood
surroundings.
huddled on the porch.
I think we need to
drenched and
backtrack.
miserable looking.
Try to find where
James
we went
supported
wrong.
Sarah,
who appeared to be
No,
limping.
Becca said suddenly,
Thank
her voice
God.
firm.
James
We
exclaimed
need to
when he
keep
saw
going
me.
forward.
We thought we were lost for
Tyler
sure.
and I exchanged
Eleanor
concerned
ushered them
glances.
inside with the same
Why?
insistent
I asked
hospitality
carefully.
she'd shown me.
Because that's where
Children,
we're supposed to go.
you're soaked to the
she
bone.
replied with unsettling
Come,
certainty.
come, by the fire.
She's waiting.
I have dry clothes
Who's
and hot
waiting?
food. Becca? As the
Tyler
Winslows
asked,
dried
stepping
off
closer
and
to
changed
her.
into clothes that
Becca blinked
Eleanor somehow
rapidly.
had ready.
Confusion crossing
Clothes
her
that,
features.
like mine, fit
What?
each of them surprisingly well.
I don't know why I said
they
that.
explained what had happened.
She pressed her palms
They'd
against
reached
her
the
temples.
summit with Thomas,
I
but
have
on the
such
way
a
down,
headache suddenly.
the storm hit hard.
I reached into my
Sarah
pack for
had
the
slipped
first
on
aid
wet
kit and
rocks
gave
and
her some
twisted
pain
her ankle.
relievers.
Then
Maybe
they'd
we should
somehow
rest
gotten
here
off
for
the
a
main
bit,
trail.
I suggested.
Without
Though every
GPS,
instinct
screamed
theirs
at
had
me to keep
malfunctioned,
moving,
just like
to
mine,
get as far away from
and
this
with
place as
darkness
possible.
approaching,
They'd been
we
on the
found a
verge
small
of panic
clearing
when
where
they
we
could
could
sit
sit
and
and
have a
from
quick lunch of
Eleanor's
energy
chimney.
bars and trail mix.
Thomas wanted to
The
keep
forest
going.
around us was
James explained
unnaturally
as
quiet.
he accepted a bowl
No
of bird
stew.
song.
No
Said we were
rustling
close to
of
the
small
lake,
animals in
but
the
with Sarah's
underbrush,
ankle and the
just
kids
the occasional
exhausted,
whisper of
I
wind
wasn't
through
taking
the
chances.
trees. As we
Where
ate,
is he now?
I noticed
I
Becca
asked,
staring
suddenly
fixedly
concerned.
at something just
James
beyond my
shrugged.
shoulder. Kept going his
When
own
I turned
way.
to look, there was
Stubborn
nothing
guy.
there.
Eleanor
What do you
served
see?
everyone
I
food
asked
and
her.
more of her special
Patterns,
paying
she replied
particular attention to
distantly.
the children.
They're everywhere once you know
Growing
how to
bodies
look.
need nourishment.
Before I
She
could
cooed,
question her further,
ruffling
Marcus
Liam's
suddenly
hair and
jumped to his
gesture
feet
that made the boy
hackles
shrink
raised.
back slightly.
A deep growl
As we
rumbled in
ate,
his chest
I
as he
noticed
stared
Emma
in the
staring
same
at
direction
Eleanor
Becca
with
had been looking.
undisguised fascination.
This time,
I caught a
"Are you a
flicker
witch?"
of movement between
the girl
the trees.
asked abruptly.
Something
"Emma,"
pale moving
Sarah
with
gasped.
unnatural speed.
"That's incredibly
We
rude."
need to go, Tyler
But
said,
Eleanor
already
just
on his
laughed,
feet and
a
gathering his
melodious
gear.
sound that somehow raised the
Now.
hairs on the back of my neck.
We quickly packed up
What a
and
delightful
continued our
question.
journey.
Some
Though
might
journey
call me that,
now felt
I
like the wrong
suppose.
word. I prefer
We weren't hiking
keeper of
anymore.
old ways.
We were fleeing.
I know the plants
Though
that
from
heal
what
and
exactly,
the words that
I
comfort.
wasn't sure.
Is that
Tyler
witchcraft to
took
you?
the lead, compass
Emma
in hand,
nodded solemnly,
determined to find
You have
our
a
way
witch's
back
cottage,
to a marked
and
trail.
you knew we were coming.
I stayed in the middle,
A strange
keeping a
tension
close eye
filled
on
the
Becca,
room, who followed
Eleanor's
us with the
smile
same
remained
vacant
fixed,
expression she'd
but her
worn by the
eyes
pool
hardened
that morning.
slightly.
The
The
afternoon
mountain
passed
tells
in
me
a blur
things,
of
child.
increasing dread.
Just as it might
The
speak
forest
to you
around us
if you
seemed
listen
to shift
properly.
and change in ways that defied
After dinner,
logic.
Eleanor insisted
Paths
we
would
all
appear
stay the
promising,
night,
only
arranging
to end
sleeping
abruptly
places
against rock
throughout
faces
the
or
cabin.
dense thickets that
The
hadn't
Winslows
been
took
visible
the
from a
bed
distance.
with Emma on a pallet
Twice
beside
we
them.
crossed the same
Liam
distinctive
was given
fallen
a small
log
cot
near
despite
the
Tyler's
pantry.
insistence that we'd
I
been
was to
walking
sleep
in a
on a
straight
mat
line.
near the fire with Max beside
This
me.
isn't possible.
Rest, he
now,
muttered after the
Eleanor
second
said
time.
as she dimmed the
We
oil
can't be
lamps.
going in circles.
The storm passes.
Maybe
but
we
the
should
night
make camp
holds its own
early,
dangers,
I
suggested, looking
I
at the
lay
already
awake
dimming
long
light.
after everyone else
My
seemed to be
watch read
sleeping,
3:47
including
p.m.
Eleanor,
But
who
the
had
forest
retreated
was
to what she
darkening as
called
if
her
evening was
meditation
already upon
space
us.
behind the pantry.
Try again in the morning.
Max
with fresh
remained
eyes.
alert beside me.
Tyler hesitated,
His eyes reflecting
clearly
the dying
reluctant to
embers
stop
of
when
the
we were so
fire.
thoroughly lost.
Something
but
felt
eventually
wrong.
nodded.
You're
The
right.
tea had left
We
a
need to
strange
regroup,
aftertaste.
figure
and
out
my
where we
thoughts
went
seemed
wrong.
sluggish, dreamlike.
We found a relatively open
I found
area
myself
to make camp,
replaying Eleanor's
though I noted with
stories,
unease
her
that the
warnings
ground
about
was
the
disturbed
mountain's
in
hunger,
places,
the
as
way
if
she'd
someone
looked at the children,
or something
I must have
had
drifted
recently
off
been digging.
eventually because the
We
next
worked
thing I
silently
knew,
to set up the
Max
tent.
was standing
The weight
over
of
me,
the day's strange
whining
events
urgently.
hanging heavy between us.
The fire had died
As
completely.
Tyler prepared to start a
Leaving
fire,
the cabin in
Becca
darkness
wandered
save
to
for
the
a
edge of
faint
our
glow
campsite.
coming from behind the pantry.
I'm going to collect more
I
firewood,
checked my watch,
she announced, already moving toward the
3:17
trees.
a.m. As
Wait,
my eyes
I
adjusted
called.
to the darkness,
Remember what we
I
agreed?
realized
We stay
Liam's
together.
cot was empty.
I'll just be
Alarmed,
right over there,
I got
she
up
said,
as quietly as
pointing
possible
to a dense
and checked
stand
the
of
main
trees
door,
about 30 yards
still
away.
bolted from the inside.
We need kindling.
The only
if we
windows
want a
were
fire
shuttered and
tonight.
latched. Where
Before
could the boy have
either
gone?
Tyler or I could protest
soft
further,
sound from the pantry
she disappeared
caught my
into the
attention.
gathering shadows.
Moving
Cautiously
Marcus
with Max at
whined
my
anxiously
heels,
at my
I
side.
approached the narrow doorway.
I'll go with her, I
Beyond
told
the
Tyler,
pantry
reaching
with
for
its
my
hanging
headlamp.
bundles of herbs
finished
and
setting up
shelves of
camp.
jars was another door.
Be careful,
slightly
he warned.
ajar, golden
And don't go
light
far.
spilling through the crack.
With Marcus at my
I
side, I
hesitated,
followed in the
torn
direction
between
Becca
respecting
had gone,
Eleanor's privacy
calling her
and
name
concern
softly.
for Liam. The forest
A
seemed to
child's
swallow
voice
the sound.
decided me,
My voice traveling
Liam,
no further than a
speaking
few
in a
feet
monotone
before being
unlike his
absorbed by
normal
the dense
excited
vegetation.
chatter.
I couldn't make out the
Shadows
words, but
lengthened
the sound
and deepened
deepened
with
ice through
unnatural
my
speed.
veins. making
Pushing
it
the
difficult
door
to
open
see
wider,
despite
I
my
found myself
headlamp.
looking down a short set of
Becca,
stairs into
I
a
called
cellar.
louder.
I wouldn't
Fear
have
beginning
guessed
to creep up
existed.
my spine. The space below
Where are
was
you?
illuminated by dozens
twig
of candles.
snapped behind me,
Their
and I
light
spun around
reflecting
to
off
find
what
Becca
appeared to be a
standing
large
there,
copper
arms
basin
full
in the
of
center
broken
of the
branches.
room. Eleanor
In the
stood
beam
with her
of
back
my
to
headlamp,
me,
her
hair
face
now
looked
loose
gaunt,
and flowing
her
past her
eyes
waist,
sunken and
wearing
wearing
a deep
deep
dark
red
circles
robe.
that hadn't been there
Before
earlier.
her, Liam
I
stood
found wood,
perfectly still,
she said, her voice
eyes
flat.
vacant, wearing
Jesus,
only his
Becca,
underwear.
you scared me. Don't wander
The
off
blood
like that.
remembers.
I wasn't
Eleanor
wandering,
was saying.
she replied.
Her voice
I was
deeper
collecting.
than before.
That's what we do
resonant
here.
with power.
We collect things.
The flesh knows.
We.
Tell
A
me
smile
what you
spread
see.
across her face,
Child.
too wide and holding no
Darkness.
warmth.
Liam replied
Grandmother
in
and
that
I.
same empty voice.
Ice flooded my
Roots
veins,
reaching through
Becca,
stone.
you're scaring
Hunger
me.
without end.
Her expression smoothed
And
into
what does it
something more
hunger
normal,
for?
though her eyes
Life.
remained vacant.
Warmth.
The spark
Don't
that
be
burns
silly,
in
Eliza.
beating hearts.
I'm fine.
Let's
Eleanor
get back to
nodded
camp.
approvingly.
I followed
Yes.
behind her,
And tonight
noting
we
how she
begin to
moved
feed
with the
it,
stiff,
as my mothers have done for
unnatural gait,
300 years.
as if her joints
The
weren't
blood
quite
moon
working properly.
comes, and with it,
Marcus
the
growled
thinning
softly,
of the veil.
keeping his distance from her.
She
as we
raised a
returned to
hand
camp,
in which
gleamed a curved
Tyler
knife.
had managed to get a
Without
small fire
thinking, I
started,
burst through the
but
door.
like the previous
Stop.
night, the flames burned with
Eleanor
occasional
turned,
flashes
and in
of
the candlelight,
blue-green.
her face was transformed.
Everything okay?
Younger somehow,
He asked
more
as we
beautiful,
approached.
but terrible
Fine.
in its cold
Becca
perfection.
answered before I could speak.
The photographer.
She dropped her
she
armload
said,
of wood
sounding
beside the
mildly
fire
annoyed.
and sat down heavily.
I thought the tea would keep you
I
asleep
caught Tyler's
longer.
eye and gave a subtle
Get
shake
away
of my
from him.
head. I demanded,
Not
moving
fine.
down the stairs.
Not fine.
Max
at
followed,
all.
a continuous growl
We ate
rumbling
dinner
from his
in
chest.
uncomfortable silence.
You
The
misunderstand.
fire casting eerie
Eleanor
shadows
said
across
calmly.
our faces.
I'm not going to harm
Becca
the boy.
barely touched
He's
her
merely
food,
a vessel,
staring
a
instead into the
mouthpiece.
flames with the same
The first
fixation
offering
she'd
is
shown
always
toward
blood
the pool that
freely
morning.
given.
As darkness
She held up her
fully
other
enveloped
hand,
the forest,
which I now saw
strange
was
sounds
already cut
emerged
across
from
the
the
palm.
wilderness around us.
Blood dripping into the
Rustling
copper
that
basin.
seemed too deliberate to be animals.
Liam,
Whispers
come here.
that might
I
have been
called,
the wind,
but the boy
but
didn't
felt
respond,
like something more.
didn't even blink.
I
can't
think
hear
I'm
you,
going to turn in
Eleanor
early.
said.
Becca
He walks
announced
between
abruptly,
worlds
standing
now,
up, as
I'm not
children
feeling well.
sometimes can.
I'll come with
Did you never wonder
I
why
said
so
quickly,
many legends
not
feature
wanting her
lost
to be
children,
alone.
Eliza?
They
Inside
crossed
the tent,
boundaries more
I
easily
watched
than
as
adults.
Becca mechanically
Their
prepared for
souls,
sleep,
still
her
remembering the
movements
darkness
stiff
from which
and
all
awkward.
life emerges.
When she finally settled
turned
into her
back
sleeping
to
bag,
Liam.
she lay perfectly
Now,
still.
child,
eyes
take the
open
knife.
and staring at the
first
tent
cut
ceiling.
is yours to make.
Are you sure
To
you're
my
okay?
horror, I
Liam
asked
reached for the
softly.
blade with mechanical
You haven't
precision.
seemed like yourself today.
Max, guard!
I
I'm
commanded,
becoming
and
myself.
my loyal shepherd
she
sprang
replied without
forward,
looking at
planting
me.
himself
The
between
real
Liam
self
and
that
Eleanor,
was always
teeth
waiting.
bared.
You could
Eleanor's
become
beautiful
too,
face
if you let her
contorted
help
with
you.
anger.
Call
Let
off
who
your
help me,
beast,
Becca,
or I promise you'll watch
She
him
turned
die
her head
screaming.
slowly to face me.
What have you done
Her
to the
eyes
boy?
reflecting the
I
dim light
demanded,
filtering into
edging
the tent.
closer, looking
Grandmother
for an
Wicker.
opening to grab Liam.
She's been waiting for us.
Nothing permanent
For me.
yet. A smile spread
She
across
made a subtle
her face,
gesture with her
bleeding
lips
hand,
stretching too
and to my
wide.
shock, Max yelped
She's
and
so
backed
hungry,
away as if
Eliza.
struck.
So
The
very
next
hungry
will not
after all
be a
this
warning.
time.
I fought
A
against
scream
the
from
urge to
upstairs
scramble away
interrupted
from her.
whatever she planned
You're
next.
not making
Sarah's
sense.
voice
I
high
think
with
you might be
panic.
getting sick.
Liam, maybe we
Emma,
have some medicine.
James. I don't
Eleanor's
need
concentration
medicine.
broke
She
for just an
her
instant,
voice suddenly deeper,
but it was enough.
resonating
I
in a
lunged
way
forward,
that didn't
grabbing
sound
Liam around the
entirely
waist
human.
and
dragging him backward
I need you
toward
to
the
listen.
stairs. To see.
The boy struggled weakly.
She reached out and
still
grabbed
in
my
his
wrist with
trance-like
surprising
state.
strength. Her
Foolish
skin
woman,
felt unusually
Eleanor
cold
hissed,
and rough,
all pretense
like
of the
tree
kindly
bark.
hostess gone.
She's coming for all of us, Eliza. She's already taken part of me. Soon, she'll take the rest. I pulled my arm free, heart hammering in my chest. I'm going to get Tyler, I said, moving toward the tent entrance. He already knows, Becca said, her voice once again flat and emotionless. That's why he came. To find her, to offer her something. Before I could respond, the tent flap opened and Tyler appeared, his face grim in the beam of his headlamp. Everything okay in here? I heard voices. No, everything is not okay, I hissed, keeping my voice low. Something's wrong with Becca. She's talking nonsense about Grandmother Wicker and saying you brought us here on purpose. Tyler's expression didn't register the surprise I expected. Instead, he looked resigned. We need to talk, he said, gesturing for me to follow him outside. I hesitated, looking back at Becca, who had resumed her unsettling, rigid posture, staring blankly at the tent ceiling. She'll be fine for now, Tyler assured me. Please, Eliza, there are things you need to know. Reluctantly, I followed him out of the tent. Marcus joined us immediately, pressing against my leg as if trying to protect me. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim red glow over our campsite. Beyond the small circle of light, the forest seemed alive with movement and whispers. "What's happening, Tyler?" I demanded. "And don't tell me more ghost stories. Something is seriously wrong with Becca, and I think we need to get her to a hospital." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, his expression pained. "It's not that simple. The stories I told you last night, they weren't just stories." "What do you mean?" "My grandfather didn't just hear legends about Grandmother Wicker. He encountered her. And when he did, she took something from him. A piece of his soul, he always said. He was never the same afterward." Tyler's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Before he died, he made me promise to find her, to end what she started." "This is insane," I said, backing away from him. "You deliberately led us out here because of some delusion your grandfather had?" "It's not a delusion." Tyler's voice rose sharply before he caught himself. "Look around you, Eliza. The weird fire colors, the time discrepancies, the branches that move on their own. You've seen it all yourself. All I've seen is that we're lost in the wilderness and my best friend is having some kind of breakdown or psychotic episode." "Then explain how she knows about Grandmother Wicker. I never mentioned that name until after Becca started acting strange." I had no answer for that. "Something in these woods has been influencing her since we arrived," Tyler continued. "Since she touched that water this morning. It's how the Weaver works. She finds a way in through water, through dreams, through the little moments when our guard is down." "So what now?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, what's your plan?" "There's a cabin," Tyler said, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of our fire. "My grandfather described it in detail. If we can find it, we can find her. And if we find her, we can end this." "End it? How exactly?" Tyler reached into his shirt and pulled out a silver pendant on a chain around his neck. The pendant was etched with strange symbols I didn't recognize. "This belonged to my grandfather. He claimed it was the only thing that kept her from taking him completely. If I can get close enough—" A twig snapped loudly in the darkness beyond our camp. We both froze, listening. For several long seconds there was only silence. Then, unmistakably, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, circling our campsite. "Get in the tent," Tyler whispered urgently. "Now!" We retreated quickly, zipping the tent flap closed behind us. Inside, Becca sat upright in her sleeping bag, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "She's here," Becca said, her voice eerily calm. "Grandmother has come to collect." "Becca, snap out of it," I pleaded, reaching for her shoulders. Tyler grabbed my arm, stopping me. "Don't touch her. It might not be safe." Outside, the movement grew closer. Something pressed against the side of the tent, creating a bulge in the fabric. Marcus growled, positioning himself between us and the disturbance. The pressure moved slowly along the perimeter of the tent before disappearing. "What do we do?" I whispered. "We wait until morning," Tyler said grimly, "and then we find the cabin. And Becca? We keep her with us. Maybe if we can stop the Weaver, Becca will return to normal." It was a long, terrible night. None of us slept. Becca remained unsettlingly still and alert, occasionally whispering to herself in words I couldn't quite make out. Tyler sat by the tent entrance, knife in hand, watching for any sign of intrusion. I kept Marcus close, drawing comfort from his solid presence as the sounds of something moving around our camp continued intermittently until dawn. When the first pale light filtered through the tent fabric, Tyler finally relaxed his vigilant posture. "I think we're okay for now," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We emerged cautiously to find our campsite transformed. The ground was covered in strange patterns, circular depressions and raised ridges in the soil that hadn't been there the night before. Our backpacks, which we'd left outside the tent, had been moved and arranged in a precise line pointing east. Most disturbing of all, every tree surrounding our camp had been marked with the same symbol, a crude stick figure with elongated arms etched into the bark. "Jesus," I breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the scene. Tyler examined one of the symbols, his face pale. "This is it. This is her mark." Becca stepped out of the tent behind us, her movements still stiff and unnatural. She surveyed the modified campsite with apparent satisfaction. "She's showing us the way," she announced, pointing to where our backpacks were aligned. "We need to go that direction." Tyler and I exchanged glances. "Do we trust this?" I asked him quietly. "I don't think we have much choice," he replied. "These woods aren't natural anymore. We could wander for days and never find our way out. But we could be walking into a trap." "Almost certainly," he agreed grimly. "But at least it's a deliberate one, rather than a slow death from exposure or starvation." We packed up camp quickly, both of us keeping a wary eye on Becca, who stood motionless, staring in the direction our backpacks had indicated. When everything was ready, we set off with Tyler leading, Becca in the middle, and me following with Marcus close at my side. The forest grew increasingly strange as we walked. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches often woven together to form archways and tunnels across our path. The ground undulated beneath our feet, sometimes rising into steep, unexpected hills, other times dropping sharply into narrow ravines that didn't appear until we were right upon them. Most disturbing were the cocoons, Tyler's term for the basket-like structures woven from branches and vines that hung from trees or stood upright among the trunks. They grew more numerous the further we traveled, and larger too. Some were small, no bigger than a football, but others were large enough to contain a human body. "Don't touch them," Tyler warned when I paused to examine one. "Just keep moving." "What are they?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. My grandfather called them her collection, specimens preserved for study. I shuddered and quickened my pace, pulling Marcus along with me. The dog had been growing increasingly agitated, whining and pulling at his leash, clearly wanting to flee in the opposite direction. I couldn't blame him. After about 2 hours of hiking, we emerged into a large clearing dominated by an ancient oak tree. The tree was massive, its trunk wider than any I'd ever seen, its branches spreading to create a canopy over the entire clearing. What made it truly horrifying, however, were the human figures fused into its bark. Faces pressed outward from the trunk, mouths frozen in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Arms reached from the wood as if trying to pull free, only to end in fingers that became twigs and leaves. The entire tree seemed to be composed of human forms in various stages of transformation, merging with the wood until they became indistinguishable from the natural structure. "Oh my God!" I gasped, instinctively backing away. Becca walked forward as if in a trance, reaching out to touch one of the faces embedded in the trunk. "Beautiful," she murmured. "So perfectly preserved." "Get her away from there," I hissed at Tyler. He moved quickly, grabbing Becca's arm before she could make contact with the grotesque tree. "Not yet," he told her firmly. "Where's the cabin? Where does grandmother live?" Becca turned to him with that too wide smile. "Close now, very close." She pointed to a barely visible path leading away from the clearing, deeper into the forest. "That way. She's waiting for us." Tyler's grip tightened on her arm. "For all of us? Or just for you?" "She always needs more," Becca replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The collection is never complete." With growing dread, we followed the narrow path away from the clearing. The forest closed in around us once more, the trees pressing so close together that we often had to turn sideways to squeeze between them. Marcus whined continuously now, his body trembling with fear, but he stayed loyally by my side. The path ended abruptly at another clearing, smaller than the first. In the center stood a cabin so ancient it seemed to have grown from the forest floor rather than been built upon it. The logs that formed its walls were blackened with age and partially covered in moss and fungi. The small windows were dark, revealing nothing of the interior. A crude porch sagged beneath the weight of various objects hanging from the roof. Bundles of dried plants, animal bones, glass jars filled with unidentifiable contents that caught the dim sunlight. "We found it," Tyler breathed, a mixture of triumph and fear in his voice. Becca pulled free of his grasp and walked toward the cabin with purpose. "Grandmother," she called, her voice suddenly stronger than it had been in days. "I've brought them, just as you asked." "Becca, stop!" I shouted, lunging forward to grab her. I was too late. The cabin door swung open on creaking hinges, revealing a darkness deeper than seemed possible in daylight. From that darkness emerged a figure that made my blood run cold. She appeared human only in the most basic sense. A woman's form, hunched and ancient, but with proportions all wrong. Her arms hung too long, nearly touching the ground as she shuffled onto the porch. Her skin was a patchwork of textures, in places smooth and pale like birch bark, in others rough and dark like the trunk of an oak. Her face, partially hidden beneath a tangle of hair that might have been hair or might have been roots, showed only one feature clearly: a wide, toothless mouth stretched in a perpetual grin. "Grandmother Wicker," Tyler whispered beside me, raising the silver pendant before him like a shield. The creature's head snapped toward us, her single visible feature, that terrible mouth, widening further. "Visitors," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "How thoughtful of you to bring me new specimens. Rebecca." Becca nodded, her movements now fluid and natural, as if being in the presence of this monstrosity had somehow restored her. "They're perfect, Grandmother, especially the woman. Her life force is strong." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "Becca, what are you doing?" She turned to me, and for the first time in days, I saw real recognition in her eyes. Not the vacant stare she'd worn since the pool, but the calculating gaze of someone fully aware of their actions. "What I need to do to survive, Eliza." She was going to take me, weave me into her collection like all the others. But I offered her an alternative. I offered her you. "You've been planning this all along?" The realization made me dizzy with horror. Since Atlanta, the camping trip was all a setup. "Not at first," Becca admitted. "Not until Tyler contacted me about the legends of Cohuta. He was hunting for Grandmother, obsessed with finding her. I saw an opportunity." I turned to Tyler, who looked as shocked as I felt. "You knew about this?" "No," he protested. "I mean, I knew about Grandmother Wicker, but I never—" He trailed off, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "You played us both," he said to Becca. "You knew I was looking for her, and you used me to find her. Used us both as offerings." Becca shrugged, unmoved by our horror. "Self-preservation. Grandmother needs new material for her collection, and I prefer it not be me." "Very clever girl," the creature called Grandmother Wicker crooned, extending one of her elongated arms toward Becca in what might have been a gesture of affection. "You'll make a fine apprentice. Much better use than just another face in my garden." Tyler stepped forward, the pendant held high. "This ends now. You took something from my grandfather, and I've come to take it back." Grandmother Wicker tilted her head, regarding Tyler with what might have been curiosity. Ah, the grandson. I remember the old man. His fear was exquisite, so pure, so perfect. I keep a piece of it still, nestled safe in my collection. "Give it back," Tyler demanded, his voice shaking. "Release him." The creature laughed, a sound like branches breaking in a winter storm. "His essence is mine now, woven into the fabric of my forest. To release it would be to unravel my entire collection." She gestured broadly, encompassing the wilderness around us. "Would you destroy all of this for one small piece of a man long dead?" "If that's what it takes," Tyler said, advancing toward her. Grandmother Wicker's amusement vanished. "Then you are a fool, like your grandfather before you." She raised a gnarled hand, and the forest floor beneath Tyler's feet erupted in a tangle of roots and vines, wrapping around his legs with impossible speed. Tyler cried out, slashing at the vegetation with his knife, but more tendrils rose to replace each one he cut. The silver pendant glowed faintly in his hand as he fought, seeming to repel the vines wherever it touched them. I stood frozen in horror, unable to process the impossible scene before me. Marcus barked frantically, pulling at his leash, urging me to run. But where could we go? The forest itself was our enemy now. "Help me!" Tyler shouted as the vines dragged him to his knees. His cry broke my paralysis. I lunged forward, grabbing his outstretched hand, trying to pull him free. The moment our fingers touched, something passed between us. The pendant, pressed hastily into my palm. "Run!" he gasped, his body now almost completely engulfed by the writhing mass of vegetation. "Find your way out. The pendant will protect you." "Tyler, I can't." "Go!" he screamed as the vines covered his face, silencing him. I staggered backward, the silver pendant clutched tightly in my fist. Grandmother Wicker turned her attention to me, that grotesque smile widening further. "The last one," she hissed with pleasure. "Come, join my collection. Your friend has made her choice, and the man has made his. Only you remain." The ground beneath my feet began to shift, roots breaking through the soil, reaching for my ankles. Marcus snarled and snapped at them, buying me precious seconds. "You can't escape," Becca called from the porch where she now stood beside the monstrous creature. "The forest belongs to her. Every tree, every vine, every drop of water. There's nowhere to run." But I had to try. With the pendant clutched in one hand and Marcus's leash in the other, I turned and fled back the way we had come. Behind me, Grandmother Wicker's laughter echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of pursuit. Branches cracking, undergrowth rustling, the forest itself coming alive to chase me. I ran blindly, no longer trying to find a path, simply putting distance between myself and the cabin. The trees seemed to close ranks behind me, branches reaching to snag my clothing and hair. Only where the pendant touched did they recoil, creating narrow corridors through which Marcus and I could barely squeeze. Time lost all meaning as I fled through the twisted landscape. The forest played tricks with distance and direction. Paths that should have led to the clearing with the human tree instead opened onto unfamiliar terrain. The sun, when visible through the canopy, seemed to jump positions in the sky, sometimes directly overhead, sometimes hovering near the horizon. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me onward. Marcus stayed close, helping guide me around the worst obstacles, his animal instincts perhaps more attuned to the safest route than my panic-stricken mind. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a small glade where a stream flowed over mossy rocks. Exhausted beyond measure, I collapsed beside it, gasping for breath. Marcus whined and paced nervously, clearly wanting to continue our flight. "Just a minute," I panted, examining the pendant in my hand. The silver disc was warm to the touch, its etched symbols glowing faintly with an inner light. Whatever power it held seemed to be keeping the worst of the forest at bay, creating a small bubble of safety around us. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Tyler was gone, consumed by the living forest. Becca had betrayed us, offering us as sacrifices to save herself. And somewhere behind us, a creature that shouldn't exist was hunting me through a wilderness that bent to her will. The stream gurgled pleasantly beside me, the water clear and inviting. My throat burned with thirst, and I reached out instinctively to cup some water in my hand. Marcus barked sharply, bumping my arm away from the stream. I looked at him in surprise, then understanding dawned. "The water," I whispered. "That's how it started with Becca." The stagnant pool, the way she'd changed after touching it. "Good boy," I told Marcus, stroking his fur gratefully. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. Marcus growled, his attention fixed on the trees we'd just emerged from. I climbed painfully to my feet, knowing our brief rest was over. "Which way?" I asked Marcus, as if he could understand the full complexity of our situation. To my surprise, he seemed to. pulling deliberately on his leash in a direction upstream, away from where we'd come from. I followed his lead, the silver pendant held before me like a talisman. We moved more cautiously now, my initial panic giving way to a strategic wariness. When branches reached for us, I touched them with the pendant, watching with a mixture of fascination and horror as they recoiled and withered. The stream led us uphill, the terrain growing steeper and rockier. The forest thinned somewhat, giving way to outcroppings of stone and patches of hardy mountain vegetation. For the first time since finding the cabin, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps we were nearing the edge of Grandmother Wicker's territory. That hope was short-lived. As we crested a rocky ridge, the forest below came into view, stretching endlessly in all directions, with no sign of roads, clearings, or anything that might indicate civilization. Worse, the patterns were visible from this height. Vast circular formations in the canopy, centered on what must be the cabin, spiraling outward like a web. We were still trapped in her domain. A sound behind me made me turn. There, emerging from the tree line we just left, was Becca, or the thing that had once been Becca. Her transformation was more advanced now, her skin taking on the texture of bark in patches, her movements fluid in a way that suggested her bones had been replaced by something more flexible. "You can't escape her, Eliza," she called, her voice carrying unnaturally across the distance between us. "The pendant only delays the inevitable. Sooner or later, you'll tire. You'll make a mistake, and she'll add you to her collection, just like Tyler." "Why, Becca?" I shouted back, my voice breaking. "We were friends." "Friends," she repeated, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. "Such a temporary thing. Grandmother offers something more permanent, something eternal." She gestured at the vast forest below us. "All of this, Eliza, all of these lives, preserved forever in her collection. I could have offered you a place at my side as I will be at hers, but you chose to run. You call that preservation?" I was incredulous. "Those people are suffering, trapped and conscious in those things." Becca tilted her head, considering. "Consciousness fades eventually, or so Grandmother says. The collection becomes part of the whole, individual awareness merging with the greater mind of the forest." She took a step toward me. "It's not so terrible in the end." "Stay back," I warned, raising the pendant. She stopped, eyeing the silver disc with caution. "That won't protect you forever. Its power fades with distance from its maker." "Its maker? You think your friend's grandfather crafted such a powerful charm?" "No. Grandmother herself made it long ago, a token for a favored apprentice who betrayed her. The symbols are hers. The magic is hers. It protects you now only because of the residual power it contains, power that is nearly spent." I looked down at the pendant, doubt creeping in. If Becca was telling the truth, our only defense was weakening with every step. "Give it to me," Becca urged, extending a hand that was now more branch than flesh. "Surrender now, and I'll ask her to make your transition painless. Fight, and you'll feel every moment of your transformation, just as Tyler is feeling his." The thought of Tyler, conscious and suffering as the forest consumed him, made me sick with grief and horror. But I couldn't give up. Not now. "I'll take my chances," I told her, backing away toward the ridge's far edge. Becca's face contorted with anger, the bark-like patches spreading visibly across her skin. "Then suffer with the knowledge that you could have spared yourself the pain." She lunged forward with inhuman speed. I turned and ran, Marcus at my heels, down the far side of the ridge. The descent was treacherous, loose stones giving way beneath my feet, forcing me to half-slide, half-run down the steep incline. Behind me, Becca followed with the fluid grace of a predator, unbothered by the difficult terrain. At the bottom of the ridge, the forest waited to reclaim us. But something had changed. The trees here were different, their formation less chaotic, suggesting we had perhaps reached the edge of Grandmother Wicker's influence. The pendant in my hand glowed brighter, as if responding to the shifting energy around us. I plunged into the trees, Marcus leading the way, his nose guiding us through the underbrush. Behind us, Becca's pursuit slowed, her calls becoming more distant, more desperate. "You're going the wrong way," she shouted. "You'll never find the path home." I ignored her, pressing forward. Whether it was luck, Marcus's instincts, or the pendant's guidance, the forest here seemed more natural, the trees standing individually rather than woven together, the undergrowth normal instead of twisted and sentient. After what felt like miles, we burst from the tree line onto a gravel road, narrow and obviously seldom used, but unmistakably man-made. I fell to my knees, relief washing over me in a wave so powerful it left me dizzy. Marcus barked, pulling me back to my feet. He was right. We weren't safe yet. I staggered to my feet and followed the road, hoping it would lead to a highway, a ranger station, anything that represented safety and civilization. The road wound downhill through more normal forest for about a mile before connecting with a larger paved road. A faded sign indicated we were on the edge of the Cohuta Wilderness Management Area, though in which direction the main entrance lay, I couldn't tell. I chose a direction based on the descending slope of the road, reasoning that it would eventually lead to a valley and perhaps a town. Marcus and I walked for hours, jumping at every sound from the forest that still bordered the road, but no pursuit materialized. Eventually, the trees thinned further, giving way to scattered farmland on either side of the road. As dusk approached, the distant shape of a gas station appeared on the horizon, a beacon of civilization I had begun to think I might never see again. My pace quickened despite my exhaustion, Marcus matching my renewed energy. The elderly attendant looked up in surprise as I stumbled through the door, dirty, bleeding from numerous scratches and wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. "Lord girl, what happened to you?" he asked, coming around the counter to help me to a chair. "Got lost," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "In the Cohuta Wilderness. My friends, they're still out there." He made a call to the local sheriff's department while giving me water and a bag of beef jerky, which I shared with Marcus. By the time the deputy arrived, I had concocted a story about getting separated from my hiking group during a sudden storm, a tale that made more sense than the impossible truth. The search for Becca and Tyler began that evening and continued for 2 weeks. Teams of rangers and volunteers combed the area where I claimed we had been hiking, but no trace of them was ever found. Our campsite from the first night was discovered, exactly where it should have been, but no evidence of our journey deeper into the wilderness could be located. It was as if they had simply vanished, or as if the forest had swallowed them whole. I returned to Atlanta afterward, attempting to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I gave statements to the police, spoke with Becca's distraught parents and Tyler's confused colleagues. I answered the same questions over and over. Why had we gone off trail, despite our experience levels? Why hadn't we carried emergency beacons? What exactly had happened during the storm that separated us? I stuck to my story about the storm, about getting disoriented, about searching frantically for my friends before finally finding my way to safety. What else could I say? That an ancient creature called Grandmother Wicker had taken them for her collection, that Becca had betrayed us, offering us as sacrifices to save herself, that the forest itself had come alive, pursuing me through impossible landscape. They would have locked me in a psychiatric facility before I finished speaking. In the months since, I've researched everything I could find about the Cohuta Wilderness. Old legends, historical disappearances, folk tales about women who live deep in the forest and collect unwary travelers. There's surprisingly little documented, but enough to convince me that I'm not the first to encounter Grandmother Wicker, nor the first to escape her. The silver pendant remains in my possession, hanging on a chain around my neck. I've had it analyzed by 3 different jewelers, none of whom can identify the symbols etched into its surface or explain why it sometimes grows warm against my skin for no apparent reason. Marcus stays always at my side, more protective than ever, Sometimes I catch him staring into the distance, hackles raised, as if sensing something I cannot perceive. On those nights, I close the blinds and double-check the locks, though I know doors and windows would provide little protection if she ever decided to come for me. I dream of them often. Tyler and Becca. In my dreams, I see Tyler's face pressed into the bark of a massive tree, his eyes open and aware, silently screaming for help that will never come. I see Becca moving through the twisted forest, her body increasingly inhuman, gathering specimens for her new grandmother's collection. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the trees in my Atlanta neighborhood, I hear whispers that sound like Grandmother Wicker's voice, promising that sooner or later she'll add me to her collection. I keep the pendant close. I stay away from forests. I never drink from natural water sources. And I wait, knowing that one day she'll find me again. The Weaver of Cohuta isn't finished with me yet. No one escapes her collection forever. My name is Eliza Harmon. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, though sometimes I still wake up screaming, convinced I'm back there, running through those endless woods as the sun refuses to rise. I used to love the wilderness. As a wildlife photographer, I spent half my life in remote places most people never see. That was before Blackwood Hollow, before I learned that some legends have teeth. 3 months before my trip to the Chattahoochee National Forest, my husband David died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver. One moment he was texting me that he was picking up dinner on his way home, the next he was gone. The grief counselor suggested I might eventually find healing by returning to the activities that once brought me joy. Photography had always been my passion, my escape, and I had a commission due for a conservation magazine featuring Georgia's old-growth forests. So when I felt strong enough, I packed my gear and headed for the mountains. The Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia spans nearly 750,000 acres of pristine wilderness, rugged mountains, and winding creeks. I'd chosen the remote Blackwood Hollow Trail specifically because it was less traveled than other routes. Its ominous name supposedly came from the dense stands of blackwood trees that blocked almost all sunlight in certain sections. At least, that's what the park ranger told me when I registered my hiking plan. "You going alone?" Ranger Thompson asked, his weathered face creasing with concern as he looked over my permit application. "Yes," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I've done solo trips before." He handed back my permit with a frown. "Blackwood Hollow's pretty remote. Cell service is non-existent out there, and we've had some strange reports lately." "What kind of reports?" "Hikers getting turned around, even experienced ones. Lost time. One guy swore he walked the same half-mile loop for hours, couldn't find his way out until morning despite having a GPS." I smiled politely. "I'll be careful. I've got my satellite beacon if there's an emergency." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Just stick to the marked trails and be out before dark. And, folks around here say don't venture too deep into the hollow after sunset, especially not this time of year." I thought he was just trying to scare the city girl. I should have listened. The first day on the trail was uneventful. September in the Chattahoochee National Forest meant cool mornings, warm afternoons, and a kaleidoscope of early fall colors beginning to paint the forest. I hiked about 7 miles in, stopping frequently to photograph interesting fungi, the play of light through the canopy, and a family of deer that crossed my path. I set up camp in a small clearing near where a narrow creek curved around a cluster of moss-covered boulders. The temperature dropped as night fell. I built a small fire, ate my dehydrated dinner, and reviewed the day's photographs on my camera's display. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. Several photos had unexplainable light artifacts, like smoky tendrils curling through the frame. I checked my lens for smudges but found nothing. More disturbing, in the background of one image, a shot of a strange twisted blackwood tree, I could make out what looked like a figure standing between distant trunks. I hadn't noticed anyone when taking the picture. Technical glitches happen. and eyes can play tricks in forest shadows, so I tried not to dwell on it. I was about to turn in when I heard singing, a woman's voice, soft and distant, somewhere in the darkness beyond my campfire's light. The melody was unfamiliar, the words indistinct, but somehow mournful. I called out, thinking another hiker might be nearby, but received no response. The singing stopped abruptly. Probably just the wind playing tricks, I told myself, though the night was still. I zipped myself into my tent and eventually drifted to sleep. I dreamed of running through endless woods, pursued by something I couldn't see. In the dream, the trees whispered warnings I couldn't quite understand, and the moon overhead was blood red and pulsing like a heart. I woke, gasping at 3:17 a.m. according to my watch, my heart hammering against my ribs. Outside my tent, the forest was deathly silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound like fingernails against the fabric of my tent. It moved slowly around the perimeter, pausing occasionally as if listening for me. I lay frozen, barely breathing, clutching my hunting knife. "Who's there?" I finally managed to call out, my voice embarrassingly weak. The scratching stopped. Nothing but silence answered me. After several minutes, I worked up the courage to unzip the tent and peer outside. The clearing was empty. My campfire had burned down to embers that cast a dull red glow across the ground. Nothing moved in the surrounding forest. I noticed something else, though. My backpack, which I'd left propped against a tree, was now laying open on the ground, its contents scattered. My heart sank as I stepped outside to inspect the damage. My food supplies were untouched, but my map was missing, and my compass had been smashed, its glass face cracked and needle bent. Most disturbing of all, someone or something had arranged a small circle of pebbles around what remained of my fire. Each stone was marked with a crude symbol drawn in what looked horribly like dried blood. Next to the stone circle lay a single blackwood twig, arranged in the shape of a woman with outstretched arms. The craftsmanship was disturbingly precise. The tiny figure even had a small face formed from bark, its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat with my back against a tree, knife in hand, watching the forest until dawn gradually filtered through the trees. With the growing light, I began to doubt what I'd seen. The stone circle seemed less menacing, the marks more likely to be natural patterns in the rock than blood symbols. I told myself it was probably raccoons that had gotten into my pack, and the scratching just a branch against my tent. I was exhausted, but determined to continue. I'd come for photographs, and the morning light was perfect. Using the GPS on my camera, I didn't trust my phone's battery to last the entire trip. I decided to press deeper into the wilderness, following Blood Creek upstream toward a waterfall marked on my now-missing map. The forest grew denser as I hiked, the trail less defined. By midday, the creek had widened, flowing between steep banks lined with ancient hemlocks. I stopped to photograph a particularly haunting scene. The creek disappeared around a sharp bend, framed by two massive trees whose roots formed a natural archway. As I framed the shot, a dark figure flashed at the edge of my viewfinder. I lowered my camera. Nothing there. I raised it again, and this time clearly saw a woman in a long dress standing beneath the natural arch, her face obscured by what looked like a veil of dark hair. My finger froze on the shutter button. When I looked up from the viewfinder, the arch stood empty. Heart pounding, I quickly took several photos, then reviewed them on the display. My blood ran cold. In each image, the figure was clearly visible. A woman in what appeared to be an old-fashioned black dress, her head bowed, standing precisely where I'd seen her through the viewfinder, but not with my naked eye. In the last photo, her head was raised slightly, and though her face remained obscured by long black hair, I had the horrible impression she was looking directly at the camera. At me. I nearly dropped my camera. My hands trembled as I packed it away. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to get out of these woods and never return. But a strange fog had settled over the forest while I'd been taking photos, and I was no longer certain which direction I had come from. The trail had vanished. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "Follow the creek back downstream." But which way was downstream? The water seemed to be flowing in both directions at once, defying physics. The fog thickened, reducing visibility to just a few yards. My GPS was glitching, showing me in a location I knew couldn't be right. According to it, I was miles away from where I should be. I chose a direction and walked, keeping the creek to my right. Time seemed to stretch and compress in strange ways. My watch said I'd been walking for 3 hours, but the sun had barely moved in the sky. The fog never lifted. That's when I stumbled upon the cabin. It appeared suddenly through the mist. A small, crude structure of dark wood and stone that looked like it had been standing for a century. No smoke rose from its chimney. No signs of life. Just a dilapidated cabin that, according to my useless GPS and all the trail information I'd studied, shouldn't exist. Curiosity overcame my fear. I approached slowly, calling out to announce my presence. Only silence answered. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, opening into darkness with just a gentle push. The cabin's single room was cold as a tomb. Dust coated every surface except, strangely, a rocking chair near the hearth that looked recently used. A crude table held mason jars filled with unidentifiable objects floating in cloudy liquid. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. The walls were decorated with strange symbols carved directly into the wood, spirals, stars, and eye-like shapes that seemed to follow me as I moved through the room. In the corner stood a narrow bed with a stained mattress. Above it hung a collection of photographs, old Polaroids and more recent digital prints. With growing horror, I realized they were all pictures of hikers. In some, the subjects smiled at the camera, unaware. In others, they appeared disoriented or frightened. The most disturbing showed people sleeping, clearly taken without their knowledge. My stomach lurched when I recognized Ranger Williams in one of the photos. He was younger, standing proudly on a rocky outcropping I hadn't yet seen on my hike. But someone had scratched out his eyes in the photograph and written "Liar" across his chest in red ink. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, raising my knife. "Whoa, easy there." A man stood in the doorway, hands raised defensively. He was tall and lean, with friendly blue eyes and a week's worth of stubble. "Didn't mean to startle you." I kept the knife raised. "Who are you?" "Sam Wilder," he said, slowly lowering his hands. "Just another hiker. Got caught in this weird fog and spotted the cabin. Thought I might find someone who could point me back to the main trail." He glanced around at the disturbing decor. "Guess this place isn't exactly the visitor center, huh?" Despite my suspicion, I felt an overwhelming relief at seeing another person. "I'm Eliza. I'm lost, too." Sam stepped inside, closing the door behind him. That fog came out of nowhere. Never seen anything like it. He surveyed the cabin with obvious discomfort. "Looks like we stumbled into some kind of hunting cabin. Or something worse? Look at these." I gestured to the wall of photographs, keeping distance between us. "They're all hikers." Sam moved closer to examine them, his expression darkening. "Jesus, that's messed up. Some kind of stalker?" I peered more closely at one of the photos. "Wait, this one looks recent, but the clothing style is from decades ago." I pointed to another. "And look at the date stamp on this one, 1972. But the quality looks digital." Sam frowned. "That can't be right. Digital cameras weren't around then." "Exactly." A cold feeling was spreading through my chest. It's like these photos were taken across different times, but by the same person. "I think we should leave," I said, edging toward the door. "Try to find our way back to the trail." He nodded. "Agreed. This place gives me the creeps." He pointed to an old book lying open on the table. "What's that?" I hesitated, then approached the table. The book was ancient, its pages yellow and brittle. It was handwritten in faded ink, filled with the same strange symbols that decorated the walls. Some pages contained crude drawings of plants, others what appeared to be recipes or instructions. One page was bookmarked with a faded photograph, a stern-faced woman in 19th-century dress, her eyes unnervingly intense even in the sepia-toned image. Written beneath it in shaky handwriting, Esther Blackwood, the Witch of Blackwood Hollow. Beside the book lay a silver locket, tarnished with age. It hung open, revealing the same woman's portrait inside. Sam peered over my shoulder. Local history, maybe? Or just some weirdo's roleplay fantasy? I turned the page and felt my blood freeze. There was a list of names with dates beside them, dozens of them spanning more than a century. Some names had small locks of hair or fingernail clippings attached with dried blood. The most recent date was just 2 weeks ago. At the bottom of the page, in fresh ink that was still slightly damp, Eliza Harmon, September 15th, 2024. Today's date, my name. Next to my name was a small envelope. With trembling fingers, I opened it and found several strands of auburn hair, exactly matching my own. Hair I hadn't cut since arriving in these woods. I slammed the book shut and backed away. "We need to get out of here, now." Sam's eyes widened as he realized what I'd seen. Did that have your name in it? How is that possible?" Before I could answer, a gust of wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows. The temperature plummeted so quickly I could see my breath crystallizing in the air. The door flew open, slamming against the wall with such force that one of the hinges broke. "Run!" I grabbed my backpack and bolted through the door, not waiting to see if Sam followed. Outside, the fog had thickened to an almost solid wall, but I ran blindly into it, desperate to put distance between myself and that horrible cabin. I could hear Sam's footsteps pounding behind me. "Eliza, wait," he called. "We'll get lost if we split up." He was right. I slowed, allowing him to catch up. We stood in the mist, breathing hard, surrounded by forests that looked identical in every direction. "What the hell was that?" Sam gasped. "And how did that book have your name?" "I don't know," I said, "but someone's been watching me. Maybe watching all of us who hike here." Sam pulled out his phone. "No signal, of course. My GPS isn't working either." "Mine too." I tried to orient myself. "I think the creek is this way. If we follow it downstream, we should eventually reach the trailhead." "Lead the way," Sam said. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound our footsteps on the soft forest floor and the occasional gurgle of the creek beside us. The fog started to thin slightly, but the forest still felt wrong. Too quiet, the trees too densely packed, creating unnatural shadows even in daylight. "So," Sam said eventually, "what brings you out to Blackwood Hollow? Not exactly a popular destination." I explained about my photography assignment and, surprising myself, told him about David's death and how this trip was partly an attempt to find my way back to myself. "I'm sorry about your husband," he said. "I lost someone too, my sister, 3 years ago. She was hiking, actually. Got separated from her group in bad weather up near Blood Mountain. By the time they found her," he trailed off, his expression haunted. "That's partly why I'm here. She loved these mountains." I felt a connection with him then. Two people who understood grief's isolating power. "We're going to get out of this," I assured him, though I wasn't convinced myself. As the afternoon waned, we found a relatively open area to make camp. Neither of us wanted to be in the forest after dark, but we had little choice. The fog had lifted enough to see that we were nowhere near the main trail, and wandering in the fading light would only get us more lost. We gathered firewood together, and Sam proved knowledgeable about wilderness survival, quickly building a stone-ringed fire pit and getting a blaze going. I shared my remaining food, enough for a modest dinner for two. As darkness fell, we sat close to the fire, its warmth providing a circle of comfort against the increasingly oppressive forest. "Have you heard of Esther Blackwood?" I asked, thinking of the photograph in the book. The name on that picture, The Witch of Blackwood Hollow. Sam poked at the fire with a stick. Can't say I have. Sounds like a local ghost story. I think I saw her, I admitted, or something, through my camera lens before I found the cabin. He looked at me sharply. What did you see exactly? I described the figure by the creek and showed him the photos on my camera. His face paled as he swiped through them. Could be a smudge on your lens, he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. There's something else. I hesitated, then decided to trust him. Last night, something circled my tent, left strange symbols arranged in stones around my campfire, broke my compass and stole my map. Sam was silent for a long moment. I've been thinking, that name, Blackwood. I read something in a guidebook about the history of this area. There was a woman accused of witchcraft back in the 1800s. Local settlers blamed her when children started dying of some mysterious illness. They said she cursed the entire hollow. What happened to her? They hanged her from a blackwood tree, then buried her somewhere in these woods. According to the legend, she swore vengeance on her accusers and their descendants. Said she'd claim a life every year on the anniversary of her death. He shrugged. Just a story to scare tourists, I'm sure. When was she supposedly executed? Mid-September, I think. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Today was September 15th. We should take turns keeping watch, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't want any more nocturnal visitors. Sam agreed. He took the first watch while I tried to sleep, using my backpack as a pillow inside my small tent. Exhaustion eventually overcame my fear, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with strange dreams. A woman singing by the creek, her long black hair dripping water, her face always turned away. In the dream, she slowly turned toward me, and I knew with dream logic certainty that seeing her face would drive me mad. I woke with a start. The fire had burned low, and Sam was gone. "Sam?" I called, unzipping my tent. The clearing was empty. His backpack remained propped against a log, but there was no sign of him. "Sam!" I called louder. The forest seemed to absorb my voice. Even the creek sounded muted, as if running underwater. My watch read 2:48 a.m. Sam should have woken me for my watch hours ago. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, reluctant to leave the campsite but afraid something had happened to him. Just as I was about to start searching, I heard rustling in the underbrush. I raised my knife, pointing my flashlight toward the sound, that even in the photograph seemed to swirl with malevolence. It took every ounce of self-control not to cry out. I glanced over at Sam's still form in his sleeping bag. Was he still Sam at all? I remembered the book in the cabin with my name and date. Had it listed his name too? Was this why we had both been led here? I couldn't stay. Whatever had taken hold of Sam might soon come for me too. Moving as quietly as possible, I packed my essential gear, leaving behind anything that would slow me down. I left Sam's things untouched. Just as I was about to slip away from the campsite, his voice stopped me. "Where are you going? Eliza?" he asked, still in his sleeping bag, his back to me. "It's not safe in the woods alone." I thought I heard something," I lied. "Was going to check it out." He sat up slowly and turned to face me. In the dying firelight, his features seemed subtly wrong, too sharp, his eyes too deeply set. "You shouldn't lie to me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She doesn't like liars." I backed away. "Sam, something's happened to you. You're not yourself." "I'm more myself than I've ever been," he said, rising fluidly from his sleeping bag. "She showed me things, Eliza, in the creek, reflections of what could be." He took a step toward me. "She's been waiting for you. Said you have a gift. You can see her in your little machine. Not many can." "Stay back," I warned, raising my knife. He smiled, a horrible stretching of lips that revealed too many teeth. "She wants to meet you. Properly. She's waited so long for someone who can see." "Who is she?" "Sam. What happened to you at the creek?" his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Esther Blackwood, the witch they tried to kill. They took her eyes, you know, cut them right out before they hanged her, but she found other ways to see. He tapped his temple. Through others, through me. She's been collecting eyes for a century and a half. Yours will be special. He lunged with inhuman speed. I slashed wildly with my knife, feeling it connect with flesh. Dark blood, almost black in the dim light, oozed from the wound on his arm, but he barely seemed to notice. The cut didn't bleed normally. Instead, the edges of the wound writhed and knitted together before my eyes. "That wasn't nice, Eliza," he said with mock sadness. "Now, I'll have to hurt you before I take you to her." Before I could strike again, his hand closed around my wrist, squeezing until my fingers went numb and the knife fell to the ground. His skin felt wrong against mine, too cold, too dry, like touching old leather. "Don't fight, Eliza," he said, his voice now overlaid with another, a woman's whisper. "It only makes it worse." I kicked hard at his knee, feeling something crack. He howled but didn't release me. With my free hand, I grabbed a burning branch from the fire and thrust it at his face. The flames seemed to terrify him far more than the knife had. He recoiled instinctively with an inhuman shriek, and I broke free, snatching up my backpack and running blindly into the forest. Behind me, I heard him laughing, a sound that started as Sam's deep chuckle but rose in pitch until it became a woman's cackling shriek. I ran faster than I'd ever run, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no direction in mind except away. The forest blurred around me. Time stretched oddly again. I felt like I'd been running for hours, yet the night showed no signs of yielding to dawn. My lungs burned. My legs trembled with exhaustion. Still, terror drove me forward. I crashed through a thicket and suddenly found myself in a familiar clearing, the one with the moss-covered boulders where I'd camped the first night. But that was impossible. I'd hiked miles beyond this point. Disoriented, I stumbled to the creek's edge, desperate for water. As I knelt, the surface of the water grew still as glass, reflecting not the canopy above but a night sky I didn't recognize, filled with wrongly positioned stars. Then the reflection changed, showing me the cabin I'd fled. Inside, a woman in black stood by the table, slowly turning pages in the book where I'd seen my name. She looked up directly at me, as if she could see me watching. Her face was the same withered visage I'd seen in the photograph. Martha Blackwood, the widow of Blood Creek. She smiled, revealing blackened teeth, and reached a skeletal hand toward the surface of her side of the reflection. I scrambled back from the water just as a pale hand thrust up from the creek, fingers grasping at air. The water bubbled and frothed, turning rusty red as more of the figure emerged, stringy black hair, then a face, not Martha's, but Sam's, his eyes now solid black, his smile impossibly wide. "Found you," he said, his voice a harmonic blend of his own and the witch's. He pulled himself from the creek, water streaming from his clothes. "No more running, Eliza. She wants what you can give." "What does she want?" I asked, trying to buy time as I backed away. "Your eyes," he said simply. "Your gift. She can't enter your world properly without them. 65 years she's been trapped between worlds, reaching through wherever the veil is thin." He gestured around at the forest. "Like here, at Blood Creek, where they spilled her blood and buried her without her eyes." I continued backing away, but he matched me step for step. "She takes one every year. Someone who can see beyond. But none like you, with your magic box that captures what others can't see." He pointed to my camera. "Give it to me, and your eyes. Quick or slow, she'll have them." I turned to run, but found my path blocked by a wall of mist that seemed solid as stone. When I tried to push through, unseen hands pushed back, holding me in place. I was trapped in the clearing with the thing that had once been Sam. He approached slowly, savoring my fear. "She says if you surrender willingly, she'll send you back to your David." His head tilted unnaturally. Wouldn't you like that, Eliza? To see your husband again? For one shameful moment, I was tempted. The grief of losing David was still a raw wound. But I knew whatever this creature offered wasn't David. Just another lie. My husband is dead, I said firmly. And Sam, is he dead too? The thing wearing Sam's face laughed. Sam Wilder has been dead for years. You saw his picture in the cabin with all the others. His body feeds the creek now. This, he gestured to himself, is just memory and meat. A puppet for her to use. That's when I understood the horrible truth. There had never been a real Sam. The man I'd spoken with, hiked with, shared my grief with, he had been a construct all along, created from the remains and memories of a hiker who'd died on this trail years ago. I'd been alone the entire time. The realization should have broken me, but instead, it ignited something. Rage, determination, a fierce will to live. I wouldn't end up as another name in that book, another ghost haunting Blood Creek. You want my eyes? I reached for my camera. Let me show you what they see. I lifted the camera, using its display panel and flash as a weapon. In the darkness, the sudden burst of brilliant light stunned the creature momentarily. I took photo after photo, each flash driving it back a step, its hands raised to shield its light-sensitive eyes. "Stop!" it shrieked, the witch's voice now dominant. "My eyes! My eyes!" Something in the camera, the technology itself, or perhaps just the act of capturing its image, seemed to cause it genuine pain. I pressed the advantage, advancing as it retreated, the rapid flashes illuminating the clearing in stuttering bursts that made the world seem like a broken film reel. The creature stumbled backward toward the creek, howling with each flash. In the strobing light, its appearance fluctuated between Sam's form and something else, a withered corpse in a rotting black dress, its eye sockets empty, ragged holes. "You cannot escape," it screamed. "This is my place, my woods." "Not anymore," I said, and took one final photograph as it stood at the creek's edge. The flash reflected off the water with unnatural intensity, creating a doorway of light that seemed to tear open the fabric of reality itself. Through that rift, I caught a glimpse of somewhere else, a dark inverse of the clearing where pale figures moved among dead trees beside a black creek that flowed upward. The creature stared into this opening with a mixture of longing and terror. "No," it whispered. "Not there. Not back." I don't know what impulse drove me. Perhaps simple survival, perhaps something darker, but I lunged forward and shoved the thing that had been Sam with all my strength. It toppled backward into the creek with a splash, but instead of hitting water, it fell through the rift, its scream Dopplering away as if falling down an endless well. The tear, in reality, snapped closed like a camera shutter. The creek was just water again, flowing normally in the growing light of dawn that had finally, mercifully begun to break through the trees. I collapsed on the bank, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and delayed terror. I'd survived, but at what cost? The wounds on my arms from where Sam, or whatever he had become, had grabbed me were already turning a sickly purple, bruises in the perfect shape of elongated fingers. My ankle throbbed where I had twisted it during my desperate flight through the forest. But I was alive. Somehow. How much of what I'd experienced was real? Had there ever been a Sam? Or had I hallucinated a companion in my isolation and grief? The bruises suggested otherwise, but in this place I couldn't trust even my own body's evidence. As I sat there trying to gather my wits, something glinted in the mud near the water's edge. I crawled over to investigate and found a tarnished silver locket. With trembling fingers, I pried it open. Inside was a small daguerreotype photograph of a severe-looking woman in 19th century dress. Unmistakably the same face I'd seen in the cabin's book, written in tiny script below the image. Esther Blackwood, 1843-1872. I dropped the locket as if it had burned me. Next to where the locket had lain, half buried in mud, was something else, a human tooth, and beside it, partially embedded in the soft earth of the bank, was a human eye. Not fresh, it was wizened and preserved. Like a mummy's, the iris still a vivid blue despite its obvious antiquity. I scrambled away, retching. The fog was lifting with the dawn, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could see the forest clearly. Not far from where I sat, a trail marker was visible. I was indeed back on Blackwood Hollow Trail, perhaps a mile from the trailhead. Somehow, the forest had led me in a vast circle. I gathered my remaining strength and hiked toward salvation, each step taking me closer to the world I knew. By mid-morning, I reached my car, still parked where I'd left it days ago. I threw my gear in the trunk and drove straight to the ranger station, desperate to report what had happened. Ranger Thompson wasn't there. The young woman at the desk had never heard of him. "We haven't had anyone by that name work here in years," she said when I insisted. "The last Ranger Thompson left in 2019. I demanded to see the trail register where I'd signed in, but my name wasn't there. According to their records, no one named Eliza Harmon had registered for a backcountry permit in the Chattahoochee National Forest. "Are you okay?" the young ranger asked, eyeing the bruises on my arms and my disheveled appearance. "Did something happen out there?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything, then closed it. What could I say that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madwoman? That a witch who'd been dead for over a century had possessed a man who might never have existed in the first place? That I'd been marked in a book of victims, my name written in ink that might have been blood? "I got lost," I said finally. "Took a fall. I'm fine." I knew then that no one would believe what had happened at Blackwood Hollow. I drove home in a daze, wondering if I was losing my mind. Had grief finally broken me? Was none of it real? That night, I uploaded the photos from my camera to my computer. Most were normal: landscapes, wildlife, the documentation of my hike. But the photos of the figure were missing. In their place were corrupted files that wouldn't open. All except one. The final photo I'd taken of the creature at the edge of the creek. It was distorted, the image warped as if viewed through running water, but clear enough to see that the figure had no face of its own. Instead, in the smooth blank surface where features should be, I could make out a reflection. My own face, staring back at me with eyes that weren't mine. Sometimes now, I catch glimpses of her in reflective surfaces. Windows, mirrors, the black screen of my phone before it lights up. Just for a second, a woman in black, watching me. Waiting. Sometimes I hear distant singing when no one's there. I haven't picked up my camera since that day. I'm afraid of what I might see through the lens. More afraid of what might be looking back. I tell myself it's just trauma, just grief playing tricks on my mind. But last week, I found a small circle of pebbles on my doorstep, each marked with a crude symbol drawn in rusty red. And in the center lay a familiar tarnished silver locket that I know I left behind in the forest. The strangest thing? The photograph inside has changed. Now it shows two women, Cedar Blackwood, and me, dressed in clothes I don't own, standing in a forest I've never seen. And sometimes, when I wake suddenly in the night, my bedroom smells of damp earth and blackwood trees. I can't help but wonder, did I really escape Blackwood Hollow, or did I just bring something back with me?